Hey everyone, if you enjoy these recaps, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's get started.
2 years ago, our boy makes the biggest mistake of his life. He is sitting across a desk from an old high school friend in a sharp business suit and rectangular glasses. He stares down at a contract and feels his gut twist. The friend leans in with a smug grin and tells him not to overthink it and just sign the paper already. Something about the whole setup feels wrong and he cannot help asking if this is really safe. The friend throws his hands up in mock offense and asks if he really thinks his own high school buddy would scam him. Then comes the smooth talk. Principal guarantee, compound interest, every buzzword the guy can dig up to overwhelm a nervous cash-strapped kid. Then the friend leans in even closer and drops the killer line. He murmurs that this is not something he tells just anyone. He called our boy specifically because he was thinking of him. He watched him take work calls during his own father's funeral. He watched him bow to his boss with grief still fresh on his face. It broke his heart, the friend says. When his father is dragged into it, something furious flares up for a single second. But there is nothing he can do with the anger. All he can do is hope the goodwill sitting across from him is real. Because of this, he goes ahead and signs like a complete idiot. 2 years later, present day, and the receipt for that trust lands in full. The young man is bent over a bathroom stall throwing up the cheap snacks he finally treated himself to. He wipes his mouth in disgust and mutters a bitter curse. An ordinary 28-year-old man in South Korea is supposed to be building a life by now. He is living something that falls miles short of that. The bastard who talked him into signing has been ghost for a year and every day since has been survival. He is drowning in debt. His one remaining pleasure is a battered fantasy novel called Dark Header. He has read it into the ground over 100 times and memorized every twist, but the pages always pull him back with something new. He has 8 hours until his next part-time shift. He promises himself just 30 minutes of reading before sleep. It is the one thankful escape from his rotting life. Then something goes wrong. He blinks at the page and feels his chest lock up. Black feathers drift down out of nowhere and settle across the open book. They are crow feathers of all things. He coughs and blood spatters the paper. His heart is doing something it absolutely should not be doing and he cannot breathe. Our boy curls up on the floor and the novel slips from his fingers. He thinks bitterly that this is how his story ends and it is so pointless. And just when he was about to convince himself it was all for the best, something furious rises up inside him. Of every memory that could flash through his head in his final seconds, the one that surfaces is the smug face of the friend who ruined him. He is dying and he never got to make that bastard pay for a single thing. Then a strange broken voice cuts through the dark. It says something about a mission being complete. It mentions a special ability granted as a bonus reward. It says something about an ability shaped by the target's own desire. He has no idea what any of that means and there is no time to answer before everything goes black. When his eyes open again, the ceiling above him is not his own. He gasps himself upright and looks around a room the size of his old apartment. The room is done up in a medieval castle style. Perched on the windowsill, a crow tilts its head and stares straight at him with dark gleaming eyes. The young man asks himself if that was a dream just now. He wonders where the hell he even is. The crow lets out a rough caw and he scrambles backwards with a yell. He begs the thing not to come near him. The bird flaps closer and starts pecking at him, and for a wild moment the guy is convinced this is just a nightmare, his sleep-deprived brain cooked up. He pleads for the sky to let him wake up already, please anything. Then out of nowhere the crow tilts its head again and starts acting almost friendly. Somehow this makes the whole situation worse. He mutters in confusion and wonders what is up with this thing suddenly playing nice. Our boy drags himself over to the window and looks out. 3 moons hang in the sky. There is one red and one blue and one yellow, and a banner flutters over the distant city bearing 3 colored circles on its cloth. His breath catches in his throat. The young man knows those moons. He knows that flag. This is not the reality he knew. Before he can process any of it, a soft knock comes from the door. A young woman on the other side addresses him as Prince Ranebirun. She says it is Anna and politely asks if she may come in. Our boy nearly falls off the windowsill. He shouts back and tells her to wait and not open the door because he is not feeling well right now. He groans that his head is pounding and he hopes he sounds sick enough to sell it. Anna politely says she will come back later. He slumps against the wall and lets the breath he has been holding come rushing out. The name Ranebirun hits him hard. His suspicions were dead on. This place is the world of Dark Header, the novel he has read into the ground, and he has landed inside the body of the 7th prince of the Abiran Empire, a side character destined to die miserably early in the story. He curses under his breath. Of all the worlds he could have woken up inside and of all the people he could have become, of course it had to be this one. The relief does not last long. Another knock hits the door, and this time it is a man's voice announcing himself as Sane. His brain fires. Sane is the seventh prince's aide. It is another name he knows cold from the novel, and it is not a friendly one. Sane strides in with the young maid Anna trailing behind him. Sane is tall and lanky, with slicked back light-toned hair and small round wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He is dressed like a proper attendant. Anna hides half behind him, and her brown hair is pinned up under a white maid's headband. Her black uniform is pressed neatly under a crisp white apron. Sane lowers his head politely and explains that when he heard the noble prince had been skipping dinner of all things, he was worried and came personally. He says he has prepared a simple meal and asks if the prince is feeling any better. Our boy has to stay calm. First he has to pretend to be Abiran. He forces out that he thinks he is feeling a bit better now. Anna blinks up at him in confusion. Sane smiles thinly and says that is a relief. Then he orders Anna to set the table for His Highness's meal. Anna answers with a shaky yes. She wheels the tray over and she is trembling from head to toe. She lays out a plain plate of noodles, a stale-looking bread roll, and a small cup. Abiran starts to mutter a thanks, but the word breaks off in his mouth. He wonders why she is shaking so much. And this meal, is it for real? It looks like dog food. Sane steps in and offers to pour the tea himself. Anna startles and lets out a small sound, and in the next heartbeat she is on her knees on the floor with her forehead pressed to the carpet. She apologizes with everything she has and begs his forgiveness over and over. Our boy stares and is thrown by the reaction. What on earth is going on here? Why is she acting like this is a huge disaster? Then it clicks. Abiran is a scumbag. In the novel, this prince does not just break things and swing his fists whenever he gets irritated. If he catches a servant in a bad mood, he even kills them outright. Anna is still bowed against the floor and she whispers that she has committed a crime worthy of death, but please spare her life. That single line lands harder than anything else so far. Abiran, the character sitting in this chair, is the worst villain in the early parts of Dark Header, and every servant in this palace already knows it. Scene clears his throat and offers a polite apology for talking during the meal. He says he is glad the noble prince seems to be okay. Then he slides a stack of papers across the table with a fountain pen and asks the prince to please sign this budget proposal first. He says these are very important matters. Important my ass, our boy snaps in his head. What important matters could an incompetent, stupid seventh prince possibly have? He knows exactly what this document is. The whole thing is fabricated, and Sane's real goal is to embezzle the seventh prince's share of the palace budget. The reason a mere attendant like Sine can push this far is that he is a relative of the Empress, and the exceptionally powerful Empress holds huge influence over this entire world. But the original Abiran was a fool who knew none of that. The pen hovers over the paper. He tells himself he should not deviate from the original story just yet. So does that mean he actually has to sign this? Sine's mouth curls. Sine asks sweetly if His Highness has forgotten how to sign. He adds that no matter how much of a prince he is, that would be a bit embarrassing, wouldn't it? He is openly mocked by his own aide despite being royalty. Even if he had to possess someone in a novel, why did it have to be a piece of trash like the seventh prince? Sin sighs and admits it truly is a pity, but isn't that exactly why the prince needs him? So with a warm smile he urges His Highness not to think about anything and just sign here. Abiran freezes. The words hit him hard. They are the exact words that friend used 2 years ago in the exact same coaxing tone. The friend wore a different suit and different glasses, but it was the same trap. This is no different from the reality where the young man was taken advantage of. But no, he tells himself, he is not going to live like that anymore. Out loud he speaks up and points out to Sin that something here is a bit strange. The young man calls this a clear waste of the budget. Sin's smile freezes. Sin murmurs back that it is surprising and he did not expect His Highness to have such thoughts. He remarks that it seems he has misjudged the prince. Then, smooth as ever, Sin tries to slide back into control. He asks if the meal is getting cold. He offers to review the document again if His Highness signs first. So he urges him not to think about anything and just sign the paper. Before Sin can finish, our boy swings his arm and knocks the plate straight off the table. Food and sauce splatter down Sin's suit. Sin claps her hands to her mouth and stammers out that, "Your Highness, what is this?" Our boy answers flatly. His hand slipped, he explains. In his head he reminds himself that since he has read this novel over 100 times, he simply cannot help knowing certain things. It is true that Sin is a relative of the Empress, but the relationship is so distant that the Empress does not even know Sin exists. The whole weight behind the aide's smug threats has been an empty bluff from the start. Sin flails and demands to know what on earth the prince thinks he is doing. Our boy answers coldly that he does not know how he got here, but he has no intention of quietly dying like in the original story. He adds that his hand slipped because Sin was distracting him so much. He asks if Sin shouldn't take responsibility for that. Outside on a distant palace flagpole, the black crow perches quietly. Its dark eyes are fixed on the room and it is watching the whole thing unfold. Sin grits his teeth so hard his jaw trembles, sweat rolls down his temple, and murder is written all over his face. But he swallows the rage and straightens his tie. Our boy speaks in a voice colder than before. He says slowly that the carpet has gotten dirty, and orders him to clean it up. Our boy leans back in the chair with the look of the villain he now inhabits. Dark red spills through his eyes. Between them on the floor, Sin's round glasses lie shattered in pieces. He has no idea yet how he is going to survive this world. The young man only knows that he will survive no matter what. Down on his hands and knees on the fine carpet, Sin scrubs at the food stains and lets his inner rage boil. The imperial family are gods, he reminds himself as his rag drags across the rug. All things in the world exist for them. Only royals are born with the sacred power called manas, and only royals carry that beautiful blonde hair. Their rule over the world is a justified and beautiful thing. That is the truth Sin was raised to believe. That is the truth he burned through every last coin of his family to buy his way into serving, excluding of course that trashy 7th prince, stupid and foul-tempered and with that hideous black hair of his. You call that a royal? A pathetic bastard who only walks on eggshells around the other royals. Sin did not pour every bribe he had scraped together into a palace position just to work under a guy like that. Above him, our boy sits calmly in a high-backed chair with his legs crossed. He is sipping tea and acting like nothing at all has happened. Anna hovers in the doorway with her hands folded and watches everything without daring to breathe. Sin wipes the last stain away and pushes himself upright. Through gritted teeth he mutters that Your Highness. He has cleaned it up, and now he will take his leave. But our boy sets the cup down and lets it slip from his fingers. The porcelain hits the carpet with a hollow clatter. Sin flinches so hard he nearly drops the rag. He stammers that Your Highness. What is the meaning of this? Our boy leans back in the chair and dark red bleeds through his eyes with the look of the villain the palace already believes him to be. He tells Sin flatly that the man wasted this much time on something so simple. He should use it as an opportunity to practice more, clean it up faster. Sin bows his head and gathers the broken porcelain with hands he is fighting to keep steady. Inside he comes apart. He mutters to himself that His Highness is acting strange today and he is not sure what he should say to the Empress. Our boy catches every syllable of it in his head and almost laughs. Sin cannot even speak to the Empress, and here he is trying to swing her name around as a threat. So this is not enough to bring the man to his senses. The young man decides to make things absolutely clear so this pest never becomes a nuisance again. He turns to Anna and orders her to cover her ears. Anna blinks up at him, startled, and stammers out a yes. My ears. He tells her flatly that this isn't something the likes of her should hear. If she catches even a single word, he will have her working for the rest of her life without her fingers. Anna claps both hands over her ears so tightly the frills of her headband shake. Every trace of color drains from her face. Then our boy turns to Sin. The words he whispers next, no one else in this world will ever hear. Whatever they are, they land hard. Sin's whole face turns paper white and sweat pours off his forehead. Every ounce of the smugness he wore 10 minutes ago is gone. He looks exactly the way a man looks when he is staring straight at his own corpse. Days later, in a quiet corner of the palace grounds under a bright blue sky, 3 maids trade whispers in the sun. One of them mentions the 7th prince. Hasn't he been a bit strange since that day, she wonders. Anna might have been right after all. Anna sits on the low garden edge with her back to the mountains and hugs her knees. She agrees that she really does think so, doesn't she? He's gotten way scarier. One of the older maids sighs and wonders out loud whether they will even be alive next year. Another maid adds that at least it's a relief they haven't run into him lately. He has just been staying shut inside his palace and not stepping out at all. Then someone reminds Anna, oh by the way, isn't she on cleaning duty today? Anna gasps and jumps up. She grabs her broom and hurries off. Inside his study, our boy stands by the window with a cup of tea and looks out at the sunlit sky. Since he has been acting just like the 7th prince from the novel, no one dares suspect a thing. The servants avoid him out of pure fear. Since that day, Sin's disrespect has vanished and the aide has not come near him at all, which is fine by him. He would rather not have to throw another teapot at anyone's head. The reason he can afford to be this relaxed is that he still has time. 1 year until the original story begins. 3 years until the 7th prince is fated to die. He has read Darkheader over 100 times and he remembers the exact day, back when he was still a school kid with a backpack, that he first stumbled across that worn-out fantasy book tucked into the corner of the local library. That is how much he loves this novel. Ran Abiran sighs comfortably. It is still a long way off until the protagonist appears and the story really begins. For now, the young man tells himself, let's just elegantly enjoy some free time. Anyway, the weather is really nice. If only he had wings, it might be nice to look down at that whole view from up in the sky. Then something explodes inside his chest. Red light claws up through his body, and the teacup drops from his hand. It shatters against the floor. Ran Abiran staggers backward against the wall with his eyes wide in confusion. What is this all at once? His whole body is burning up. It feels somehow different from the last time, back when he died. This time it is not ending, it is twisting him. His whole body feels the same way a piece of paper feels when it is catching on fire. From beyond the door, Anna's polite voice calls out. She asks if he is there. Your Highness, it is Anna, and may she come into the study to clean? Our boy can barely think, he can barely breathe. Someone, he pleads silently, please save him. The door creaks open and Anna slips inside with her broom. She sighs in relief when she sees the room empty. Then she notices the broken teacup on the floor and her face falls. What a waste, she murmurs. If she sold that, her family could eat for a month. She kneels down to pick up the pieces. Then something small on the floor catches her eye. She looks closer and her jaw drops. There is a crow on the floor. It is a crow with glowing red eyes right here in the middle of the 7th Prince's study. Fanatin scoops the bird up into her arms with big worried eyes and holds him close. She whispers to him that a very scary person lives here, you know. Our boy is staring up from inside the feathered body he now somehow wears and he cannot believe this. Did he just change from the 7th Prince into a crow? Why on earth is this happening? Anna carries him over to the open window. She tells the little crow she would love to take care of him if she could, but if His Highness catches them together, they will both be dead. Ran Abiran tries to scream that wait a minute, he is that His Highness, but nothing comes out except a strangled caw. Anna leans out over the sill. She asks the bird if he can fly properly and urges him to hurry and fly far, far away. He beats his wings against her fingers and silently begs her not to let go. That is an order, please. If she lets go now, he will fall. Ran Abiran drops fast. The trees below rush up at him, and he shrieks in his own head that he'll fall to his death. What does he even need to do to survive? Just use his wings right. Fly, fly, he screams at himself. He does not want to die here. Please fly. At the last possible second, his wings snap open and catch the air. His fall levels out. His body pulls up. Our boy glides. What is this? He is actually flying. Landing quietly on a distant rooftop, he tests it. He tries one flap and then another. Then with a single wish inside his head, he changes back. He is a man again, gasping on his knees, sweat rolling down his forehead. Thankfully he was able to turn back. He tries it a few more times just to be sure. The ability to shift into a crow at will. To think he can transform just by wanting it. Ran Abiran sits down and thinks it through. Why can he turn into a crow? Is it some kind of curse from the crow that latched onto him back on his first day in this world? An ability like this never appeared anywhere in the novel. He does not know why he gained it, but one thing is dead certain, no one can ever find out. Turning into a crow was never mentioned once in Darkheader, and if word of it spreads, it could ruin the whole progression of the original story. In this world, the special power every royal is born to wield is called manus. Only a rare few are ever born with it. Every manus in the novel is tied to nature like fire and water and earth. Not one of them is anything like this. And yet whatever this new power is, it has to be linked to manus somehow. This ability is undoubtedly tied to something, he thinks. A cautious knock cuts him off. A nervous attendant on the other side stammers out that, Your Highness, the evening ritual will begin shortly. He must prepare to leave. Finally, the day has come. Once a month, the Emperor and all the primary siblings gather for this sacred ritual. They call it a ritual, but everyone in the palace knows what it really is. It is a succession test. It is a very public declaration of who stands where in the power hierarchy of the empire. Of course, the 7th Prince is not even considered a candidate. Walking into the grand ceremonial hall in person after only ever reading about it feels completely different. He takes the last chair at the very far end of the long stone table, as far from the emperor's seat as any royal can possibly be. Every one of the siblings up the table has some shade of gold in their hair, from soft honey to near white platinum. Under the chandelier light, they are almost blinding to look at. Compared to them, the young man thinks, the 7th Prince really does look no different from a crow. Then a shout cracks across the hall. A red-eyed young man with sunset-colored blonde hair storms over and glares at him with pure contempt. He hisses that how dare a half-witted bastard hold his head up without any shame. Then he adds, has this lowly trash lost the ability to understand words now? This, the young man realizes, is the 8th prince, Silos Abiran, his 17-year-old half-brother. Though it is very clear the boy has never once thought of him as an elder brother, the two of them are minor villains who only make a brief appearance in the original story. Before this can escalate, a soft silken voice cuts between them. A woman with abundant honey blonde hair walks past their end of the table with 2 maids at her side. She reminds them that they must not make an ugly commotion in front of His Majesty the Emperor, should they. So she is the first princess. If she is seated where he thinks she is seated, then starting from the left of the emperor's chair the first prince comes next, then the 3rd prince, then the 2nd prince. They are literally seated in order of rank. Ran Abiran scans the table and the pattern becomes impossible to miss. The brighter the siblings' hair, the stronger the power they possess. This is the source of everything. The manus in this world, the special power that only royals wield. That is what makes them royals to begin with. Compared to all of them, the original owner of this body had pitch black hair, and he was the only royal ever born without manus. No wonder his personality came out so twisted. And of course, at the very pinnacle of manus in all of this world's lore, there is someone standing above them all. Heavy footsteps ring against the polished floor. Every voice in the hall dies at once. His Majesty the Emperor is entering. He carries glory in one hand and conviction in the other, and ruin sits at the tips of both clasped hands. He is the peak of this empire. A tall, broad man with a stern beard and long platinum hair walks slowly up the aisle and takes the throne at the head of the table. He does not sit so much as descend. He tells them not to waste time and to begin immediately. Set into the head of the table is a triangular stone slab and it glows faintly blue. That, our boy knows from the novel, is the ancient artifact Prasa, left behind by the first emperor. When manus is injected into it, Prasa measures the caster's strength, and the way it measures is intuitive. The further the light stretches out of the tablet, the greater the manus. The emperor lays his open palm on one corner. The tablet erupts in a pillar of shimmering blue light and vines of that light unfurl out across the stone table. One of the royals whispers in awe that the light went all the way to the edge of the table, as expected of His Majesty. Another one murmurs uneasily and wonders whether the light originally reached the edge of the table like this. The emperor pulls his hand back and the light dies. He states flatly that those who wish to challenge should step forward. Silence hangs over the hall. Our boy himself has no intention of moving. There are no strict rules, but by long tradition, only the first prince ever steps up in this ritual. The reason is simple. The manus rankings, once measured, are almost never overturned. The amount of manus is equivalent to the raw magnitude of one's power, and the first prince periodically shows off in front of all the royals, to remind everyone who stands at the very top of the hierarchy. He shows them who the true next emperor is. Right on cue, the first prince rises from his chair with silver hair catching the light and steps up with a confident smile. He announces to Your Majesty that he will attempt it. He places his hand on the tablet. Blue runes bloom around his fingers. Blue light begins to build across the stone. Then he chokes hard. A raw, wet sound tears out of his throat. Blood floods down over his lip and onto his own chin. He staggers. Someone at his side jumps up and shouts, "Brother!" The first prince buckles forward. His eyes glow with a strange, sick light and blood pours down his front as his knees hit the stone. Someone yells out for anyone to hurry and call a doctor. Chaos breaks over the hall. Servants scramble. Royals shove back from their chairs. In the middle of it all, the guy sits perfectly still, and he alone in the entire room understands exactly what is happening. The first prince is going to die. He is going to die within hours, spewing blood from his entire body. He has memorized this exact moment from Dark Header word for word. But in the novel, this was supposed to happen 6 months from now. The main story of Dark Header has just been triggered 6 months ahead of schedule, and the peaceful window he was counting on has already slammed shut. The main story has begun. Back at the ritual hall, the truth of manus is spelled out plainly. Manus is a special power that only shows up in the royal bloodline of this world, and the exact ability it grants differs from person to person. The first prince wields water manus. The second prince wields fire manus. Every royal in the hall knows exactly what the first prince's measurement will look like today. It will be enough blue light to cover a little over half the table, since that is where he is supposed to be 6 months out from the incident that will eventually kill him. Except the incident is happening right now. Blood pours out of the first prince's nose and mouth in front of the entire imperial family. Someone screams for a doctor. In the middle of the chaos, our boy sits perfectly still and starts running the numbers in his head. A According to the original plot of Dark Header, the first prince was not supposed to cough up blood for another half a year. The protagonist's appearance comes after that. Everything is off by 6 months. And on top of all of that, why can the 7th prince suddenly transform into a crow in the first place? He was originally a character who could not use manus at all. An ability that never appeared once in the entire novel showed up in his body the moment right after his possession. Is that really just a coincidence? Over in the first prince's castle, an older royal physician stands wringing his hands and repeats what he has already said too many times. He insists there is absolutely nothing wrong with his highness. The body of a royal is a blessing from the gods itself, and it remains untouched by injury or disease. And yet the first prince has vomited blood in front of the entire imperial family, and the physician has no explanation. The first prince, Rasia Abiran by name, as the young man learns from the physician's bow, is in no mood to hear meaningless babble. Rasia coughs another wet gush of blood into his hand and snarls at the man to get out of his sight. He spits at him to get lost. The physician backs out and curses under his breath. Alone in his chamber, Rasia stares at his own reflection in a full-length mirror. Everything was fine just this morning, he tells himself. Yesterday was no different from any other day. He clenches his fist and swings. Glass explodes and cracks web outward across the mirror. He raises his shaking hand and tries to call up his water manus. Blue runes flicker to life around his fingers. Then they die out with a wet lurch that runs straight through his stomach. Rasia crumples over his own desk with a strangled cry. Every single time he reaches for manus now, his whole body feels like it is on fire. He whispers to himself, terrified. Don't tell him he will never be able to use manus again. Rasia shakes his head hard. That is impossible. He is the first prince of the Abiran Empire. He is the next emperor of the empire. Rasia is different from those other bugs. Of course he is. It is probably nothing serious. If he just rests a little, his manus will come back and everything will be fine again. If Rasia wants to live, a calm voice cuts in from across the room. He had better lay off that hookah first. Rasia lurches upright and whips around. He stammers out who is there. Standing quietly in the middle of the first prince's chamber and tapping the polished stem of Rasia's own hookah against his open palm is the 7th prince. Ranabiran tilts his head at Rasia with a small dry smile. Rasia stares in disbelief and lets out a bitter laugh. He thought someone had sent an assassin, he says. All he got was the cripple who cannot even use manus. He demands to know just who the 7th prince thinks he is, showing up here. Our boy tells him flatly that if he were an assassin, Rasia would already be dead. Rasia did not even notice him until he spoke, did he? Inside, he is quietly savoring the moment. Someone like him has just walked into the bedchamber of the next emperor of the empire, which is the second most heavily guarded place in the entire empire, and left no trace at all on the way in. Rasia demands to know how he got in and what trick he used. Ranabiran shrugs and answers casually that he climbed up the wall from the outside. Rasia snarls back and refuses to believe that. Our boy does not really care whether Rasia believes him. That is not what matters here. Our boy asks Rasia how his body is feeling. Of course, the royal physician probably told Rasia that nothing was wrong, but Rasia has to know his own body's condition better than anyone by now. Rasia's mouth twitches. Then he throws his head back and laughs. Right, now he gets it, he says. It seems the 7th prince used his brain a little more than his face suggests. Rasia jabs a finger at him and accuses the little trash of slipping him poison. Then he planned to use the antidote as a bargaining chip, just so the useless brother can keep his life even after Rasia becomes emperor. Our boy answers flatly that if that was his plan, then Rasia has messed up. He calls him a foolish little brother. In a week, he tells him, Rasia will be the one wishing he was dead, with blood pouring out of his own eyes and his own ears. Rasia's face twists in fury and he starts to lunge. But the young man raises one open palm and Rasia freezes on the spot. Rasia chokes out a stunned question, asking what is going on. Ranabiran tells the first prince he wants to make one thing clear. He has not used a single trick. He has not plotted a single scheme. But Rasia's body is about to go into a fast and brutal decline, and at the end of it he will die spewing blood from his entire body. Even the 7th prince himself does not know yet who is doing this to him, but he says this clearly. Rasia should listen carefully to every word he is about to say. This is Rasia's last chance to save his own life. Inside, he is almost relieved. Thankfully, Rasia is exactly as simple-minded and cowardly as he was written in the novel. He turns and walks to the open window. The moment he is out of sight of any guard, black feathers ripple across his back. A crow lifts silently off the sill and vanishes into the wet night. Not a single tail follows him back home, which means the guy thinks as his wings cut through the rain, he can use Rasia however he wants for the time being. Landing on a distant tower ledge, he shakes the water off and shifts back into a man. By the way, this ability really is convenient, he mutters to himself. It lets him travel to far more places than he ever imagined possible. And if that is the case, since he is already out, he might as well take a longer flight while nobody is watching. Off he goes with black wings beating, and he disappears into the imperial night. Back at his own palace, Anna stands stiff outside the study door with her tea tray, and her jaw is set. Ranabiran has not eaten anything in 2 whole days. There isn't a single sign of movement from his room. What if something terrible has happened to the prince? She takes a breath and bangs on the door with both fists. She cries out for the prince, asking if he is alright. Then she blurts out that excuse her, but she is coming in. She throws the door open just as our boy is climbing back in through the window with his hair mussed by the wind. Our boy mutters at her, asking what all this noise is about. Anna trips over her own feet. The tray goes flying. Tea and porcelain crash across the floor. Something in the pot bursts and splashes hot foam directly up onto her face. Anna lands on her knees, crying and shrieking that she has committed a crime worthy of death, and she truly deserves to die. She only came in because she thought His Highness might be feeling unwell, and so she just came in. As if causing a sudden disturbance was not already enough. Ranabiran looks down at her flatly. She has soiled the floor and his shoes. He asks how she plans to take responsibility for this. Anna flattens herself against the ground and begs him to spare her family, even if she herself truly deserves to die. Ranabiran sighs. He tells her no, forget it. She should clean it up spotlessly within 5 minutes and get lost. And from now on, unless he calls for her personally, she is strictly forbidden from approaching his private quarters. In his head he mutters at nothing. Our boy wonders what all this nonsense is about, her offering her life as if she were a martyr in a bad play. Now that he has laid down the rules, at least he should not have to deal with any more of these little disturbances. A full month passes. 1 month after the first prince suffered his nosebleed at the ritual, a rumor begins to slither its way through every corridor of the imperial palace. The first prince, the man who was supposed to be the next emperor, has lost his abilities. To the other princes and princesses of the Oberyn line, that rumor lands hard. Somewhere in a shadowed corridor, one royal with slicked pale hair and sharp features raises his head and his eyes have gone cold. The rumor signals to every one of them that a golden opportunity has finally opened up. In the novel, in order to quell exactly these rumors, the first prince overexerts himself and pleads with the emperor to push the annual royal hunting competition forward. Setting aside the small detail that it was originally supposed to happen a full 6 months from now, things are more or less lining up with the original plot so far. The one problem is whether all of this is only shifting inside the imperial city, or whether it is quietly pulling the protagonist forward at the same time, out beyond the walls where nobody can see. Today is the day of the royal hunting competition. Riding into the marshalling ground on a tall black horse, the 7th prince takes in the crowd of nobles and royal guards gathered at the fortress gate. If he is lucky, he might finally meet the protagonist here at today's event and hand a certain thing over. After that, all he needs to do is bide his time for the right moment. Then someone shouts at his back and calls him a bug. Silos comes riding up on a warm blonde mount, sneering, and jabs a finger at him. He mocks the young man and says that pitch-black horse perfectly suits his gloomy self. Our boy almost sighs. One thing that keeps bothering him is that maybe because this is a full year before the original story begins, Silos is running noticeably more hot-headed and impulsive than he was in the novel. Ranabiran decides he will just ignore him. There is an important event waiting for him today. He gives his reins a soft flick and moves ahead. Silos yelps behind him, asking if this little punk is ignoring him right now. Personally, the guy thinks as the ride carries him past the sneering brother, a black horse meant to mock him is far more his taste than a golden one. He gives the animal a small appreciative pat on the neck. It seems the 7th prince at least has a way of winning over animals. They finally arrive. So this is the entrance to the imperial forest. Rising up out of the trees in the distance stands a tall jagged stone spire called the Tower of the Beginning. The opening ritual for the hunt takes place here every year. Once the first prince completes the ritual on the platform at the tower's base, the hunting competition begins immediately. In reality, though, it is less of a hunt and more of a cutthroat political theater in front of every noble family in the empire. At the head of the ritual ground, the emperor turns to Ratia in his heavy fur-trimmed robes and tells him to prepare for the upcoming opening ritual. Ratia answers with a low bow that it is understood. Your Imperial Majesty. Silos trails just behind Ratia in his own white uniform, and the moment the emperor turns his attention elsewhere, the younger brother steps up with a saccharine smile. Silos remarks that he is so glad Ratia looks to be in such good health. Brother. He asks if Ratia has thought about his wish. Ratia snaps back and demands to know what wish Selos is talking about, calling him an idiot. Selos smirks and reminds him of the wish that the winner of the hunting competition gets to ask of his Imperial Majesty. He points out that Ratia is going to be today's winner anyway, isn't he? Ratia stiffens for half a second and then covers it with a huff. He replies that obviously he will be. The ritual itself is a way to showcase the next emperor's manus. It is a public demonstration of the royal family's raw power in front of every noble in the empire. Raja steps up onto the ritual altar in front of a sea of nobles. Two of them off to the side lean in and whisper. One of them murmurs that it is truly an honor to finally witness the first prince's manus in person. But the other one lowers his voice further and mentions he heard a rumor about an unfortunate incident recently. The first one hushes him and asks what if someone hears him. Raja catches every word of it and sweat begins to bead along his hairline. He curses inside that he actually listened to what that damn bug of a brother said. Off to the side, half hidden in the shadow of the stone platform, the seventh prince watches him with a small dry smile. He murmurs under his breath that Raja had better hope he wasn't bluffing. Raja raises a trembling hand over the altar. Blue manus runes flicker to life around his fingers, cold and sharp. His teeth clench and his eyes go bright and furious. He snarls inside his own head that if the seventh prince tricked him, he will kill him in the most agonizing way possible. Out in the front row among the nobles, our boy watches Raja go tense on the altar and cannot help the small grin that pulls at the corner of his mouth. Look at him, so stiff. Ran Abiren murmurs to himself, almost fond. He tells him not to be too nervous, Raja. As long as he followed the seventh prince's instructions properly, something interesting is about to happen. At the entrance of the vast imperial forest, before every noble family in the empire, Rasia Abiren stretches both hands forward and pours his manus into the sky. Water rises around him in a spiraling column, and a whirlpool the size of the ancient stone tower forms above the altar. The crowd tenses. Everyone still remembers a month ago, when the first prince spilled blood at the monthly ritual and vanished behind rumors that his power was gone. Someone in the front row shouts a warning to fall back, terrified that the vortex is about to sweep the closest nobles in. Rasia's whole body strains and for a heartbeat his face twists in pain, but he forces the words out anyway. He announces to the entire empire that he is the first prince, Rasia Abiren, the one destined to be emperor. Then he throws his hand toward the heavens. The whirlpool bursts open and a giant wolf sculpted from water leaps out of it. The wolf tears across the sky above the crowd and vanishes into the clouds, leaving thin rainbows in its wake. The nobles below erupt in applause. Duke Agony Fetus, silver-haired and dignified in the front row, murmurs that so this is the manus of the royal family. The crowd roars out cheers of long live the first prince. Our boy stands quietly below the altar as the cheers ring out and his mind slips back to the previous night. The previous night in Rasia's private bedchamber, the seventh prince held out a plain black stone in his palm. He told his older brother to grip it and pour his manus into the top, and he explained calmly that the thing could absorb polluted manus. Rasia recoiled in fury and snarled that a stone had better not be some kind of mockery. The seventh prince shrugged without warmth and added that if Rasia did not want to be treated he could just die instead, because saving people against their will was never really his hobby. Rasia's rage collapsed into dread. His eyes turned hollow and yellow-tinged with desperation as he realized he had no other move. Now, in the crisp morning light, the seventh prince slips quietly away from the altar with his black horse in tow. He tells himself that the stone bought him some time. It was supposed to appear only in the latter half of the original novel he loved, but using it a little early shouldn't cause any real trouble. Not long after, Sane finally catches up on foot with a large travel bag slung across his shoulders. He kneels stiffly and stammers out a greeting. He reports to the seventh prince that he brought the bag exactly as instructed. The prince answers coolly that Sane has finally made it. Then his voice sharpens and he asks in a colder tone why a man who cannot handle a simple errand thinks he deserves any praise. He asks whether the bag was left untouched, exactly as it was. Sane's face bows in polite obedience, but inside he is screaming. He cannot believe the seventh prince rode the vicious black horse all this way. That beast has already injured half the palace grooms. Sane picked it on purpose, hoping it would throw the prince or worse along the road. Up on the platform, Duke Agony Fetus raises his hand toward the crowd and speaks the words that officially open the day. The emperor's voice rings out across the field and the royal hunting competition begins. Riders charge into the tall grass in a tide of dust and hooves. Two commoner hunters joke to each other as they ride in. One wonders whether he should try to win the tournament, so the emperor grants him a wish. The other laughs at him and says the royal family will grab the top spot again this year, just like every year before. The seventh prince watches the stampede with dry amusement. He thinks that this competition really isn't important to him right now. His plan is simpler. He wants to stay low, avoid drawing eyes, and quietly slip through the crowd to find the former Imperial Knight Commander, Duke Agony Fetus. Deeper in the trees, Duke Fetus rides through the grass with his young aide Talon close behind. Talon, glowing with awe, tells the Duke that the opening ritual was truly the power of a god. The Duke gives a thin smile and idly comments that when he was watching it, he felt the Emperor was really trying to grind down the spirit of the nobles a little early this season. Talon nearly chokes on air. He hisses at the Duke to please only say such blasphemous things when he is alone. The Duke doesn't flinch. He tells Talon to relax because he already checked and no one is within earshot for 50 feet. The Duke smiles thinly and adds that there is a reason he is still breathing at this age. He mutters that at least this is true for now. Elsewhere, our boy rides his black horse along the winding paths and studies an old map. He explains to himself that the Imperial Forest breaks into 3 main zones. The nearest ring holds small animals, the middle one holds medium beasts, the deepest ring is for large game. In the original novel, a passing line buried inside an old memory mentioned that Duke Fetus once presented a golden fox to the Emperor at this very tournament. The problem is that the line never said where the fox was caught, and golden foxes are rare enough to slip out of sight the moment anyone looks away. That is why he has been flying through the forest as a crow for weeks, quietly mapping every corner of it. Taking into account a small detail that the Duke washed his hands in water right after the hunt, the young man figures the golden fox has to live near the lakeside in the southwest. Ran Oberon mutters to the black horse that they should get ahead of the Duke and wait for the right timing. Then he admits under his breath that sometimes it really feels like the animal understands every word he says. He tells himself with relief that Sane came through with the bag in time. As long as he can deliver it to Duke Agony Fetus in one piece, everything will click into place. Right at that thought, the black horse jolts to a hard stop and refuses to move another step. Our boy tries to coax it forward. He asks whether the bag might be too heavy. The horse doesn't answer. His patience thins and he yanks the reins. Ran Oberon tells the beast that other horses pull entire wagons and this one is being defeated by a single bag and a rider. He warns it that if this arrogance keeps up, he will personally tell the stable master to skip its meals. The horse finally lurches forward again with a bitter huff. Riding along with dirt in his teeth, the prince silently admits to himself that he is fucked. Normally, the Imperial hunters would already have a couple of wolves or deer by this hour, but today luck clearly isn't on his side. Deeper in the forest, Duke Fetus finally slows his own horse. Talon trudges behind him under his enormous backpack and he is sweating. The Duke stares up at the sky and says nothing for a long moment. Then he sighs that he supposes he has gotten old too. He remarks that he lived his whole life as a sword and shield for the Empire, but he cannot defy time itself. Talon hurries to argue. He begs the Duke not to say such things because he is already a legend. He calls him the great Imperial Knight Commander who racked up countless military exploits. Duke waves it off and says that he is nothing more than a retired old man now. Then softer, he asks Talon whether he has ever seen the royal family up close. Talon admits that he has only ever seen them from a distance, just like today. The Duke tells him that when he finally faces them directly, he will understand who the truly magnificent beings of this empire really are. The Duke explains that they are gods themselves and that House Fetus has protected the empire of such gods for 1,000 years now. He urges Talon to look outside, at the majesty of the beautiful and grand imperial capital, and with those quiet words the Duke drifts inward, and an old memory rises. He was still a small boy sitting beside his own father in a family carriage rolling through that same capital. His father, tall and stern in a decorated imperial coat, gestured out at the city. His father told him he had grown old and it was time for the boy to take his place from that day on. He told him that they must always be proud of the fact that they were a loyal family of the imperial household. The little boy answered without hesitation and agreed with a simple yes. Then another memory follows, one much closer to the present. In this one the Duke is fully grown, dark-haired and dark-bearded, and it is his own young son sitting beside him in the carriage. He is showing the boy the family's holdings. Their carriage suddenly jolts to a stop. A servant leans in and apologizes profusely and stammers that something got caught in the wheel. The servant begs him to remain in the carriage while the cleanup is handled. But the Duke steps down anyway and sees, sprawled across the cobbles, the body of a beaten child. Blood is smeared across the wooden spokes. Someone standing by remarks that it looks like a vagrant who was caught trying to steal imperial tributes from the temple. Around here this sort of sight is common. The Duke's young son cracks open the door and asks in a small voice what is happening. He says he wants to come outside too. The Duke shouts at him not to come out. His face closes over. He turns back to his son, softer, and says he really mustn't come out because this is just nothing. That was the day the smooth surface of the Duke's whole world first cracked. Back in the sunlit forest, the Duke shakes himself out of it. He murmurs to himself that the vagrant child could not even have been 10 years old. The Duke was younger than his own son at home. He tells himself that the little body was probably burned in the incinerator with the rest of that day's refuse. Then, quietly he asks himself whether there might be darkness even in such a noble empire. Tolan trudges up behind him, huffing under his rucksack, and complains that they do not have time to leisurely admire the scenery. He reminds the Duke that even if they don't win the tournament, they must at least save face for House Fetus. The Duke lets the shadow slide off his face and offers a mild apology. He assures Tolan that they will head out immediately, and adds that it just so happens he knows a place around here where a golden fox tends to appear. Not long after, Ran Abiran is jogging ahead down the trail with the huge pack bouncing on his shoulders. He gasps that running while hauling this thing is killing him. He mutters that when he gets back he is absolutely going to turn a certain horse into roast. Ran Abiran grumbles to himself that because he had to bring the bag he cannot even transform into a crow. He worries that it would be a real problem if he lost track of Duke Fetus at this exact moment. He half-seriously wonders whether he should just transform and go back. Our boy reminds himself that flying through this forest as a crow taught him one important thing. Even though this is the small animal zone, it is still very dangerous. You never know when some wild beast might pop out. Right on cue, a strained noise rustles out of the bushes. The guy freezes. His inner voice starts panicking that something is finally coming out for real. He curses that leaving the bag behind would be a total waste and mocks himself for not even bringing a simple weapon because carrying one felt too annoying. That is the moment Tolan blunders across the trail from the other side, still chasing after something out of sight. Tolan shouts to himself that he definitely saw it and mentions a black horse running from far away. Before he can finish the sentence, a stone the size of a fist snaps out of cover and cracks him across the face. Tolan folds forward in the saddle without a sound. Our boy leaps out of hiding with a strangled question of his own, staring at the hair color of the person he just knocked out. He mutters about that hair color and pleads with himself, hoping this isn't the person he thinks it is. From somewhere close by, the Duke's voice rings out, calling Tolan's name and asking if he is alright. The seventh prince stares down at the crumpled blue-haired figure and feels the blood drain from his face. That is definitely Duke Fetus's aide, Tolan Krysa. His inner voice screams that he is in big trouble now and he never expected to run into the Duke like this. This is the former Imperial Knight Commander and war hero, Duke Agony Fetus in person. This is the man who, in the original novel, will one day become the teacher of the true protagonist of Dark Header, the black-haired hero who will one day turn the entire empire upside down. And right now that sword hero of the empire is standing over the black-haired seventh prince crouched beside his fallen aide. The man has silver hair and a drawn sword and wears an imperial coat. His inner voice screams the name Agony Fetus and warns him that he absolutely cannot be caught here of all places. This was not the plan. The plan had been a small clever cruelty. He was supposed to wait ahead at the Golden Fox's habitat, and when Duke Fetus finally arrived, he would loudly insist that the Duke had been trying to steal a royal's prey. Then, as a suitably petty imperial punishment, he would force the Duke to carry a bag of stones around with him for the rest of the competition. That was all. That was the entire scheme to plant the first seed of doubt in a loyal old sword. But instead the Duke's own aide is lying at his feet with a bleeding forehead, and things are already so incredibly messed up that the young man's brain simply blanks on what to do now. Duke Fetus kneels beside Tolan and lifts the stone that struck him. He weighs it in his palm with a dark expression. He mutters that this is quite a heavy stone. The Duke notes that someone threw it here on purpose, but he cannot say for certain that they were aiming only for Tolan. He wonders quietly whether it was an assassin targeting him. Tolan stirs, groans out the Duke's name and cracks his eyes open. The Duke leans over him and calls his name softly. He checks whether he is coming back to his senses. He urges Tolan to please speak if he remembers anything at all. The seventh prince watches from cover with cold sweat pouring down his back. He reminds himself that House Fetus has protected the imperial family for over 1,000 years and is still the most powerful family in the entire empire. Our boy panics so loudly inside his own head that his ears start ringing. Things were already messed up. Damn it, what does he do? Tolan, dizzy and half-conscious, catches sight of the drying blood on his own hand. Then he mumbles apologetically that he is sorry. Duke, it all happened so suddenly. He can't remember properly. The Duke sighs and assures Talon that he understands, and that if anything comes back to him he can say so later. This is the exact moment our boy has been waiting for. This is his chance and he needs to run right now. He runs as fast as his legs will carry him and drags the heavy travel bag through the underbrush. Behind him the Duke's voice cuts through the forest and orders someone to wait. He will catch the attacker and drag them back. Then the sound of the Duke's boots crashing after him. The prince pants that his stamina is completely spent already and that running with this stupid heavy bag is killing him. Abiran figures that surely by now he has run far enough. He should be able to lose an old man in his 60s without any trouble. Then he glances back and the sight of Duke Fetus tearing through the trees with a drawn sword nearly stops his heart. That crazy old man, he thought that guy retired. The Duke shouts after him at the top of his lungs and demands he reveal his identity. Is he an anti-imperialist? Is he from a cult? The Duke declares that he does not know who this attacker is, but there is no way he will shake off Agony Fetus. The prince realizes he is about to get caught. He starts weighing bad options. Should he drop the bag and transform into a crow right now? If only he had that damn black horse right here at his side. Then he shakes his head. No, he would just at least like to be able to run fast enough to escape. He just needs to be able. A rush of warm energy sweeps through him. The Duke, chasing hard, stops and blinks. He thought he was catching up, but the target suddenly got faster. It also looked like the target's shape changed. The Duke grumbles that maybe his eyes are finally going dim, and how frustrating that would be. He pushes on a while longer before finally slowing with his chest heaving. He mutters to the trees that he might have lost him after all. Meanwhile, the prince notices something strange. His body suddenly feels lighter. He wonders whether he ended up becoming a crow again by accident, except it still feels like he is running with legs. Then he hears the pounding of horse hooves and thinks maybe that damn black horse of his came back. Or could it be him? He catches his own reflection in a shallow pool of water at full gallop. His eye looks back at him and inside the pupil are 4 running horse legs. This is crazy. He is now a black horse. Racing through the tall grass with wild mane trailing behind him, our boy can only marvel that the transformation ability was never really about crows at all. It works on horses too. Elsewhere in the hunt zone, life is going a little more pleasantly. A blonde imperial prince kneels beside an impressive kill, wide-eyed and delighted. He asks his brother if he really caught this and calls it incredible. The elder brother, streaked with blood from the hunt, smirks and asks why. Is it hard to believe? The younger admirer answers plainly that the victory for this year's hunting competition is his. He asks whether the elder has already decided on the wish he will ask of the emperor. The elder brother's smile darkens into something colder. A wish, he murmurs. He does have something in mind. Back in the forest, the guy has crashed to a stop against a tree and pants like a man who just outran his own death. He whistles softly. Then he catches sight of his empty hands. Abiran is screwed. He lost the bag while running away. Our boy drops his face into his hands and howls internally that he lost the single most important thing he was carrying today. Then he collapses onto his back and stares up at the leaves, tired all the way to his bones. He mutters that there is a limit to how much things can go wrong in one day. After a long breath, he sits up. He tells himself that agonizing about it here won't change anything. He should retrace his steps and check. By the lakeside, Talon has propped himself up against the horse and lifts a shaky hand as the Duke's silhouette returns through the trees. He calls out with relief that the Duke has come back. The Duke lowers himself beside him and inquires whether his head is feeling any better. Talon says he is all right, though still a little dizzy. The Duke wants to know more importantly, what happened. Talon looks up curiously, and the Duke admits with real shame in his voice that he ended up losing the attacker. He does not know whether the guy was simply that fast, or whether he himself is just getting old. Talon's eyes catch on something behind the Duke, and he asks in confusion what that is. The Duke sets down a heavy travel bag and explains that he picked it up on the way back, since it was just lying dropped in the grass. Talon turns it over and notes that this is quite a luxurious bag, but then his puzzled voice climbs an octave when he opens the mouth of it. He blurts out that it is filled with nothing but stones. The Duke shrugs and answers that how would he know? He mutters that someone may well have played a prank. At that exact moment, the 7th prince comes crashing through the tree line behind them and shouts out that hey, that bag. Both men whip around. Talon's mouth falls open and he stammers out a greeting to the 7th prince. The Duke and Talon drop into a low bow at once and greet the 7th prince. Talon's greeting comes out shaky. Our boy walks up and lets his voice curl into the arrogant drawl of the royal he is supposed to be. He wonders aloud whether by any chance this bag is his. He comments that he is quite relieved that they held on to it, since he was wondering where the thing had disappeared to. Then, without changing tone, he wants to know why his own item was over there in the grass. Ran Abiran demands whether they stole it. The Duke's brow tightens. He says that stealing is absurd. He simply found it in the grass while walking through. The prince smiles the crooked smile of the villain he is playing and remarks that, anyone would come up with an excuse like that. After all, no one wants to get their wrist cut off. The Duke bows again and swears upon his worthless life and the honor of his entire family that he speaks the truth. The prince switches subjects and points at Talon, wanting to know why his aide is bleeding. The Duke answers, careful, that it was from a short while ago that there was a sudden accident. Talon has been very quiet during this exchange, but now his eyes drift up and slowly widen as recognition begins climbing across his face. He wonders if the prince in front of him could possibly be the same person he saw earlier. Talon actually opens his mouth to ask, but before he can finish the question, our boy cuts him off with the flat, ugly voice of the imperial villain everyone remembers. He announces that an inferior has just dared to insolently interject in a conversation between royals. Ran Abiran asks the Duke, in a mild, courteous tone, whether Talon's head still hasn't healed properly. If that is the case, could the Duke perhaps lend him a sword? He would be glad to fix Talon's head himself. Talon's face drains of color. He stammers out the word prince, and cannot manage a second syllable. The Duke bows deeper than before and pleads that his aide has made a great mistake. He begs the seventh prince to grant mercy, and vows to discipline Talon himself, harshly. The prince tilts his head and murmurs that Duke Fetus, his loyalty is truly admirable and truly exemplary. Inside his own head though, the seventh prince is far colder than he sounds. Ran Abiran thinks that this is an imperial dog, who does not even blink when his own aide is on the verge of death. He thinks that a man like this will make sure that his young son grows up to be a loyal dog too. Then his voice softens by half a degree. Ran Abiran announces to the Duke that meeting like this is fate. He says that he will trust him and entrust him with this bag today. Our boy crouches, sets the bag at the Duke's feet and adds that it is a truly important item. Even if the Duke dies, he must never let it leave his body. Does the Duke understand? The Duke says nothing for a long moment. Then he lowers his head and answers that he will humbly obey the prince's glorious command. The prince nods and remarks that he will be going back first. He drops one last cheerful line over his shoulder about having a fun time hunting. He walks a good distance before letting out a shaky breath and admitting to himself that his body suddenly feels so light he might float. Then, more honestly, he mutters that even he thinks the acting he just did was garbage. He does feel sorry for Talon, but he needed to plant at least this much of a seed. Behind him at the lakeside, Talon drops to his knees in front of the Duke and starts apologizing that it was all because of him. The Duke tells him coldly to just consider himself incredibly fortunate that his limbs are still attached, and that they should head back and rest for today. Talon lifts his face carefully. He tells the Duke that he has remembered something about the person who threw the stone at him. It was the seventh prince. The Duke goes very still. Talon adds that he did not realize it at first, but seeing him just now in person made it clear. The Duke cuts him off cleanly with a single word telling him to stop. He warns Talon that he does not need to say a single word more. Off in the trees, our boy is walking away and thinking through his real plan. In the original novel, Duke Fetus commits a certain incident, but only during next year's hunting competition. And the reason he crossed that line back then was that his young son died within that year, which cracked the Duke's whole worldview wide open. To make the incident happen a year early, this year, he knew he would need a strong enough stimulus to bridge the gap, which is exactly what today's petty humiliation was for. And then, back near the Imperial platforms, the missing piece drops into place. The winning Imperial Prince steps forward in front of the Emperor, all confident smile and blood-flecked cheek. He announces that his wish this time is for the authority to develop the area around the temple. He declares that those vagrants parasitizing the Imperial capital, those bugs, he will personally clear them all out. A single line hangs in the air as a verdict. Duke Fetus, your future is set. Deep in the sunlit forest, the Duke stands very still. His eyes are open, but they are not looking at the trees. A distant unseen voice announces plainly that he will rebel against the royal family, because that is his destiny. The sun paints the ridge orange as a black shadow with wings drifts down from a high sky. Our boy checked over 10 times from up there before coming back down. There should not be any witnesses now, he tells himself. Now, back in his human body and walking between the noble tents, he cannot quite scrub the feeling out of his chest. He did something that awful to Fetus and Talon. It genuinely makes him feel like he became a villain for no reason. Then he sighs to himself and admits that, right, he is a villain. This is fine. He starts running the next step in his head. When the closing ceremony ends, he thinks that is when he will act. A soft voice cuts in behind him, greeting him and asking if that is really him. Ran. He freezes. A tall blonde woman with abundant honey gold hair and a poised elegance is walking toward him through the grass, with her hands loosely folded. Our boy's inner voice screams the words "the first princess" with the force of a hard shock. He never expected to run into her of all people in a place like this. Ran Abiren drops into a formal bow and greets Her Highness the First Princess. She waves the greeting away and says he can skip the stiff formalities, since after all they are siblings and they share the blood of the imperial family. He answers, careful that he only wanted a short walk and some fresh air, and he left his horse back at the quarters. The princess tilts her head and lets her voice sharpen just slightly. She says softly that she does not understand. Her tone shifts into something velvet cold. The princess asks why he would lie to his own flesh and blood. His breath catches. Our boy wants to know quietly what she means. The princess smiles as if nothing has changed. While strolling through the western forest during the day, she saw an unfamiliar black horse. Since it was such an unfamiliar color, she asked her servant about it, and he told her it was none other than the seventh prince's own horse. She personally ordered that black horse to be killed. Her tone drops another shade. Mental Abiren remarks that livestock that fails to obey royalty deserves to die. The seventh prince immediately kneels in the grass and lowers his head. He apologizes to his sister and says he was embarrassed by the fact that he lost the horse, so he inadvertently lied. Mental Abiren cuts him off kindly. She tells him to come now and raise his head. She would rather he not do that. It makes it look as though she is trying to punish her little brother. He straightens and she smiles warmly at him. The princess says she is just glad he made it back safely on his own. If he ever needs another horse, he can come to her anytime. Then she simply turns and walks away. Ran Abiren watches her go and the young man feels a chill crawl up the back of his neck. This first princess of theirs, Mental Abiren, is a truly difficult person to deal with, because it is impossible to tell what she is really thinking. But then a much colder thought lands. Why is she just leaving quietly? Ran Abiren remembers a close-up flash of her face and her bright red eyes fixed on him, calm and unreadable. He wonders quietly to himself, could it be that that ability of hers does not work on him? Elsewhere, inside the warm firelight of Duke Fetus's tent, a court doctor is holding the sides of his head as if he cannot process what he is hearing. He turns to Talon, slow, and asks him to run through it one more time. So Talon was chasing a beast, tripped over a rock, fell forward and hit his head on another rock. The doctor tells the room that he has seen all sorts of injuries at every royal hunting competition in his career, but this is truly the first time he has ever seen someone get this hurt from a couple of rocks. The Duke inquires quietly how long Talon will need to recover. The doctor says it may not look like much on the outside, but it is quite a serious injury. Talon will need at least a week of strict bed rest. Talon nearly flies out of his chair. He cries that a whole week is telling him to rest for the entire competition, and as an aide he must remain at the Duke's side. The Duke waves him back down and reminds him that his loyalty is duly noted, but his recovery comes first. He should lie down and sleep until the closing ceremony. The Duke will handle the rest of the tournament with Jack. Talon protests once more, and the Duke levels a heavy look at him. If Talon insists on this, then the Duke will have to make it an order. Talon drops the fight instantly and declares with tears in his voice that he shall do his absolute best to rest. The Duke quips that an aide coming to a hunting competition specifically to take a vacation must be a first in the Empire's history. He then adds dryly that the Duke has not given him a single day off until now, has he? His actual dream is to eat and play, but he just does not have the money for it. The Duke laughs softly and says, well, in that case he will have to win this thing just for the sake of Jack's dream. His voice drops a shade lower, but the smile stays warm. Then Jack can have the development rights to a gold mine as the Duke's wish. Later that night, a single candle burns low beside Talon's cot. A hand snuffs it out with a soft breath. The Duke sits on the edge of the bed and stares at nothing. In the empty dark, the seventh prince's voice comes back, unwanted. The Duke hears again the words about truly exemplary loyalty. He hears the accusation that he is an imperial dog who does not even bat an eye when his aide is in mortal danger. He hears the line that his son will grow up to be a loyal dog as well. The Duke rubs his forehead and mutters that he just cannot seem to fall asleep. Maybe he should go out and get some fresh air. His eyes fall on the travel bag propped against the tent wall. That bag is still full of stones. Under the cold night sky, he walks the ridge with the bag slung heavy across his shoulders. And an older memory rises up to meet him. Once, a while ago, he had told his young son that they should visit the temple that day, because there was something he really wanted to show him. Inside the vast marble halls, he had explained gently that long ago, when the world was in chaos and endless turmoil, a being of salvation had descended from the heavens. His clever little boy had immediately answered that he had read about it in a book, and asked if his father was talking about Sierra the Great. The Duke had smiled with real pride. He explained that as an incarnation of a god, Sierra had wielded mysterious powers and had subjugated those who endlessly waged war upon each other. Over 1,000 years ago he had named the unified realm the Empire of Aburan. He is the very founder of the imperial family they serve. The Duke, younger than, dark-haired and standing in full ceremonial regalia with medals catching the light, had turned to his son and called him by name. He called him his son Flynn, his precious treasure. The Duke had told the boy to please follow in his footsteps and become a proud sword for the imperial family. The present-day Duke shakes himself out of the memory and finds himself trudging under the weight of the bag. He grumbles under his breath that it is heavy. Then, more quietly, he asks himself why he is even carrying these stones around. Is it out of loyalty, or maybe something else? A deep horn note cuts through the night. His head snaps up. He wonders if that horn could be the closing. Down at the ceremonial field, a crowd of nobles and hunters has already gathered in half-dressed excitement. One clutches at his hair and stammers that this cannot be real, since all of these were caught in a single night. Another says he heard the sounds of beasts crashing and screaming did not stop all night. Someone at the back says it seems that the first prince simply wiped them all out. A colossal wave of blue water mayonnaise roars up over the field. Inside the tower of water, the shapes of dozens of hunted beasts drift together in a river of carcasses. At the base of it stands the first prince, one hand raised, a blue mayonnaise orb pulsing in his palm. A voice booms over the crowd announcing that as the first prince of the Aburan Empire has in a single night achieved an overwhelming hunting record, he is hereby declared the winner of this hunting competition. Razia lowers himself onto one knee before the emperor. The emperor, silver-haired and ancient and cold in expression, tells him quietly that congratulations are in order on his victory. Razia thanks your imperial majesty. The emperor tells him that as per tradition, the first prince may now state the wish he desires. Around the field, the nobles start murmuring. They wonder what he is going to ask for. Someone reminds them that it was just last year that the fourth prince asked for the right to purge the nomads of the border regions. Razia lifts his voice and speaks with easy authority. He begins that recently, vagrants have been infesting the area around the temple of Sierra the Great and posing a threat to the dignity and security of the temple. In order to restore the ruined aesthetics of the temple, he says, he has a request. Somewhere in the ranks, Duke Fetus stops breathing. An image lands in the Duke's mind that he cannot push away. Armored knights in imperial livery, swords drawn, standing over piles of dead bodies with fires burning at their backs. Razia's voice, cool and formal, finishes the sentence. He humbly requests the authority to cleanse them. The Duke's face goes gray. A single line of blood runs down from where he has been biting his own lip. His son's voice reaches him, small and thin from years ago. The boy is calling out to his father. The Duke hears the mocking whisper of the seventh prince right on top of it, calling him a loyal imperial dog. And then unbidden, the beaten face of the vagrant child from the road, mixed with the face of his own boy. The Duke's hand tightens around the hilt of his sword until his knuckles go white. But that child was innocent, he thinks. His arm swings hard and cuts through empty air as if he could tear the vision open with steel. The Duke says, low and broken, that he is sorry. He speaks the name of his son Flynn. Off in a quiet corner of the noble tents, a certain black-haired prince is looking down at a bandaged head propped against a tent stake at a very wrong angle. The seventh prince's voice comes down calm and unamused, calling out for Talon's attention. Talon's eyes flutter open upside down. He starts to ask who is there, then his brain catches up. He tries to scramble upright and bow at once and stammers a greeting to His Highness the seventh prince. Our boy steadies him with a hand and warns him to move slowly, because he will get dizzy from the blood rushing to his head. Then, in the same flat, helpful voice, he adds that Talon should make sure to get a doctor to prescribe antibiotics later. He corrects himself and says olive leaves would be better. Talon, stunned by the domestic kindness, stammers out an excuse me. He asks what brings the seventh prince here, of all places. The prince answers that well, the reason aside from that. Then he glances toward the field and drops the polite tone. Ran Abiran demands whether Talon honestly does not know what kind of situation his duke is in right now. The closing ceremony should have started by now. Talon's face drains. Our boy says dryly that yes, and Talon had better run over there right this instant. Talon bolts through the tents with wide panicked eyes, apologizing to nothing and no one, and shouting for the crowd to make way. But nobody in the massed crowd is turning their heads to listen. Everyone is staring at something at the front. At the ceremonial ground, 4 executioner knights in dark helmets stand ready over a row of ragged vagrants who have already been forced to their knees. Between the knights and the kneeling prisoners, a single figure has walked out into the empty space and blocked the way. He has silver hair, a thick silver beard, and a sword drawn point down in the grass. Duke Agony Fetus is standing exactly where no one expected him to be. Raja stares at him with the pure disbelieving eyes of a man who was seconds from finishing a speech. He manages to say Duke's name and demands to know what is going on. The Duke does not raise his voice. He answers, level, that the Fetus family served Sierra the Great from the very beginning, and they have protected the imperial family from the closest vantage point for over 1,000 years now. He continues that it seems their Fetus family is far more suited for the lowly task of dealing with the vagrants around the temple than the imperial guards. So he, Agony Fetus, humbly makes this request before his imperial majesty. He asks that House Fetus be allowed to take charge of the temple business rather than the crown. The old emperor on the raised dais watches him for a long moment. Then his cold voice comes down slow and dry. He announces that in high regard for the loyalty the Duke has devoted his entire life to, he will grant his request. However, the Emperor adds, letting the pause hang, it is quite comical to think that such great loyalty would lead the Duke to block the very will of royalty. Razia has already turned his palm upward. Blue Manus coils around his wrist in bright angry threads. He mocks the Duke and wants to know whether he really thought the first prince would show him mercy. Razia warns him that he must have lost his mind. He reminds him that his current actions warrant immediate execution. The Duke does not step back. He answers, quiet and steady, that the sin of interrupting the sacred ceremony is one he shall pay with his life. From the outer ring of the crowd, Talon finally breaks through with tears already streaking down his bandaged face, and he screams the Duke's name. Standing a few rows back, the guy watches all of it with the calm expression of a reader who already knows the page number. Ran Abiran thinks that it is finally starting. He hopes that guy is watching from far away too. Far from the imperial forest, at the edge of a quiet mountain stream, a hooded young figure has been kneeling to fill a battered wooden ladle with clean water. Something makes him pause. It is a tug in his chest he cannot explain. Droplets of the stream begin to rise up on their own and thread around his outstretched hand. He watches them float upward with dawning confusion. He whispers to himself, wondering what this is. The water around him grows into a spinning halo, and inside it an image forms. The voice asks if he can see it clearly. The execution ceremony of Agony Fetus. It asks if he can see the Manus of royalty that he will one day be facing. It calls him the true protagonist of the novel Dark Header, and it calls him by name. His name is Ratel. A cold announcer voice rings out over the ceremonial ground and frames the man kneeling in the arena as if reading from a history book. The voice calls him a hero, the head of the Fetus family, which has protected the royal family for 1,000 years. The former Imperial Knight Commander who made countless contributions on the battlefields of this empire across 30 years. And the voice hardens as it calls him the one who committed the felony of insulting the Imperial family. A new name for the record, the sinner, Agony Fetus. In the name of the first prince of the empire, Raisha Abiran, the announcer declares that the summary execution shall now be carried out. Raisha lifts his hand and blue water Manus erupts from the earth into a screaming pillar with Duke Fetus at its heart. The Duke's body seizes as water floods around his face and throat. He gasps that he cannot breathe. The pillar spirals tight around him and blue light warps the entire world into a wall of moving glass. Through that wall his eyes find a small blurry shape at the front of the crowd. He sees a bandaged head and round glasses. He sees Talon. The Duke's heart twists as he spots his aide standing where he should not be. He wonders why Talon is in a place like this right now. The Duke wonders why Talon is in a place like this right now. He knew Talon had faked how dizzy he really was. Then the anger folds into something warmer. He is glad to see that Talon looks healthy, and he is quietly ashamed that they should part like this, with him drowning in front of the whole empire in such a pathetic state. He tries to send Ran Abiran one last message with his eyes. He knows it is shameless of him to ask this, but please, please look after Flynn. Duke Fetus stares in a daze at the seventh prince. Beside him, Talon's tear-blurred voice catches the same thing and asks, into the wind, what the prince is saying. Inside the wall of water, a face begins to shape itself. There are familiar features, imperial features, moving as if the water were a mirror. The prince's mouth forms two soft words that the Duke reads off his lips as a farewell. The words are not yet. And then quieter, our boy adds that he cannot die. Duke Fetus, drowning, silently repeats it back inside his own mind. He cannot die. Off in a shadowed corner between the noble tents, the young man lowers his hand from the sky. Blue Manus threads coil around his fingertips as if they were fire that had learned to be graceful. The moment he snaps his fingers, an enormous pillar of azure light explodes up from the ceremonial ground and tears open the sky above the imperial forest. The ground shakes. Talon stumbles under the blast of light, and in the crowd no one can see the black-haired prince clearly, but his face is still and focused, with the expression of an author closing a heavy book. Far away from all of it, in a quiet library warmed only by afternoon light and dust, a young man with soft gray hair and grave calm eyes is bent over a page. His head snaps up at a distant sound only he seems to hear. Above the far tree line, a streak of blue light is cutting across the horizon, as if it were a wound in the sky. He sits back down and stares out through the glass, still holding his page open, watching. Somewhere much closer to the falling beam, a hooded figure on a cliff has already broken into a run. The wind pulls at his rough brown cloak as he sprints along the ridge and closes on the streak of blue. The man arrives in time to see a shimmering sphere of water mantis, roughly the size of a person, coming down through the air ahead of him. He drops to one knee at the edge of the ridge and squints into the sphere. He mutters to himself that he cannot really tell, since it is too blurry inside. Then, quieter, he asks himself what on earth is inside that thing. The water rushes and swirls, and inside the sphere the outline of a body catches the light. There is a person in there. The sphere plunges past him toward the ravine below. The hooded figure launches himself off the cliff after it, and slams through the trees into the river beneath. Water and cloak and hair all spray up in a single sheet. Water droplets sluice down his cloak as he lets the hood fall back just a fraction. A pair of golden eyes narrows and lifts to the sky above the ravine. He mutters breathless, whether he lost it. From where he stands, a fresh line of blue mantis is still visible somewhere over the distant green ridge, and it is drifting on the way the tail of a comet does. Back at the imperial ceremonial ground, the pillar of water is gone, and the duke is gone with it. Talon, still bandaged and swaying on his feet, stares at the spot where his master had been standing seconds ago. He whispers to himself that to think the hero Duke Fetus would meet such an end. Up on the raised dais, the emperor's voice comes down flat and final. He states that it is over. Then, cool and administrative, he adds that the closing ceremony of the royal hunting competition will now be held at noon. All participants, until then. Raja, streaks of dried blood still on his cheek from earlier, dusts his sleeves and mutters that they caught one little bug. When you show mercy, he adds dryly, those who do not know their place are bound to pop out. Someone else in the noble crowd sneers openly that the Fetus family is finished too. Another adds, louder now, that to think such an idiot was the head of that family. Talon walks through them all with his head down and his glasses fogging over. One noble spits on the ground at his feet as he passes and calls him a traitor. Talon does not lift his eyes. He does not answer. Standing off to the side and watching, our boy sees Talon swallow every one of those blows. He thinks quietly that Talon's heart must be breaking right now. They were close after all. Talon was the Duke's aide for years and years, but this one will not break. Not this Talon. Talon walks alone into a small tent at the edge of the field. He lets the flap drop shut behind him. His eyes catch on something folded on the desk. He bends, picks up a small envelope, and turns it slowly over in his shaking hands. He whispers that it is a letter. Then, staring at the wax seal on the back, his voice catches. He recognizes the crest as the Fetus family's. He breaks the seal with a trembling hand and unfolds the parchment. The Duke's handwriting stretches out across the page in careful strokes. The Duke writes that if Talon is reading this letter, then he is probably no longer in this world. When that time comes, he asks Talon to please pray that he can go to Terranum, and he begs humbly that Talon take care of his son Flynn. The letter continues. The Duke pleads that Talon please grant this old man's final request. He has a feeling that he is about to make a huge mistake soon. If that situation does arrive, Talon should know one thing above everything else. Everything that has happened is absolutely not Talon's fault. Then, in a heavier hand, the last section reads as a decree. The head of the Fetus family, Agony Fetus, hereby declares that in the event that something happens to him, he appoints his aide Talon Chrysa as the acting head of the Fetus family. May the blessings of Sierra the Great be with him. Talon's grip loosens. The parchment slips from his fingers and drifts down through the still air, and Talon, who has been standing upright by sheer will since the moment the water pillar rose, folds slowly at the knees and collapses on the tent floor beside the letter. Elsewhere in the Imperial Palace, days later, our boy walks unhurriedly into a familiar private chamber with his hands buried in his pockets. A voice from further in tells him coolly that he has used his manus quite extravagantly. The prince tells him plainly that if Rashia thought he was completely cured, he is horribly mistaken. In fact, Rashia's condition has actually worsened since the royal hunting competition. Rashia snaps at him to shut up and lunges forward with sudden force. Rashia snarls that this thing was supposed to absorb the polluted manus. He demands to know whether there is not something wrong with the treatment method. He warns that if the prince does not want to die today, he had better give him a straight answer. The prince does not move. He answers flatly that it would be better for Racia to release his manus more slowly. If Racia releases it so hastily, say by generating a whole storm of water manus to drown a duke in front of the empire, it will only make things worse. The prince tilts his head and continues in the same calm tone. He guesses that Racia is thinking he will tear the prince to shreds as soon as his body fully recovers, that little bug. But that disease of Racia's is not something that can be cured all at once, and Racia should know that he is only still breathing thanks to that stone in his hand. Then, as if just remembering something, he adds a side note. Rumor has it that Tolan is still in a coma. It is making him feel guilty for no reason. Deep inside the fetus family estate, in a shaded bedroom, that same Tolan's mind drifts alongside a single anxious thought, looping back into itself. He is asking himself whether Flynn will actually die. Tolan's eyes crack open under a heavy sweat-damp brow, wide and staring at nothing. A servant nearby jolts upright and calls him by his new title of acting head. He begs Tolan, since his body is not fully recovered yet, to please let him help him up. Tolan, already pushing himself upright with a shaking arm, tells him he is fine, and asks him to please step aside. The servant argues that Tolan has been unconscious for over 2 weeks. He could collapse again at any moment. Tolan does not answer that. He needs to see the young duke first. He demands to know the family's current situation right now, today. The servant hesitates. Then, to be honest, he answers that the situation is not very good. All of the fetus family's business partners have turned their backs on them. The internal staff have almost all left as well. Their financial situation is dire, and yet they are in absolutely no position to ask the royal family for help. Tolan closes his eyes for a moment and answers quietly that he supposes it is all because of that incident. A small voice reaches him from the hallway, calling his name. Tolan's head snaps up. He turns and finds a small silver-haired child standing wide-eyed at the door, and the whole shattered composure of him lights up at once. Tolan calls out to the young duke, half crying. He hurries across the floor and drops onto one knee in front of Flynn. He is still bandaged and still swaying as he asks if the young duke is feeling all right. Flynn tells him that he is fine and apologizes for causing him any concern. Flynn adds gently that it seems a lot of problems have arisen while Tolan was away. He mentions that even father's funeral arrangements still haven't been made. Tolan cuts in with a soft note about that very topic. Flynn's brows lift. He wants to know if that is true. Tolan only tells him it is. Out in the corridor, 2 servants leaning against a windowsill do not know that Tolan is close enough to hear them. One is muttering about the reason the former Duke fetus did such a crazy thing. He suggests it was because the young Duke is really a vagrant's child, or so they say. The other says he knew it, and always thought it was strange that the Duke had a child at such a late age. He suggests they should hurry up and escape too before they are treated like traitors themselves. That kind of traitor stigma, one adds low, is going to be very difficult to erase forever. Tolan's expression cools by several degrees. He calls softly for someone named Pale. Pale answers from behind him with a yes. Acting head. Tolan tells him, calm and clipped, to cut out the tongues of the ones gossiping outside and to bring them to him. He calls it the punishment for spreading false rumors about the young Duke. Pale's mouth actually falls open. He stammers that this is what he heard him say. Tolan looks at him without blinking and wants to know whether he needs to repeat himself. Pale bows his head with a book still clutched to his chest and answers quiet, that he will do as commanded. And Tolan adds as he starts down the hallway with Pale beside him, they will not be holding a funeral. Flynn's voice trails after him from the doorway, small and confused. Tolan does not slow down. He explains without turning around that the former Duke can no longer be considered a member of this family. He hopes that the young Duke will understand. Flynn hurries after him with his sleeves flying. He asks Tolan why he would do such a thing. Tolan stops at the top of a wide staircase. He turns and looks down at the small boy who is his master's small son. He announces that he is currently the acting head of the fetus family. Therefore, until Flynn becomes head of the family later, he has a duty to protect it. From now on, for the honor and survival of the fetus family, he will use any means necessary. Tolan pushes his round glasses up the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers, and the light catches the lenses and turns them into white blank shields. The palace hall stands empty and silent. Marble columns rise into shadow. Gold trim catches the low light and a throne hums with the weight of 1,000 years of history. And then the silence shatters. Racia is losing it. The first prince of the Abiran Empire slams his fist into whatever is closest. Racia howls that this is a goddamn disaster. He curses over and over until his voice tears through the air. The elegant heir of the empire, the man everyone whispers is the strongest manus wielder among his siblings, is currently reduced to a heaving sweat-drenched mess in the middle of his own chamber. His chest rises and falls in ragged bursts as he refuses to accept the corner he has been backed into. A maid catches a glimpse of him from the doorway and can only manage a tiny startled gasp before he turns. His face twists into something ugly and murderous. He mutters that he will tear the little worm apart limb from limb. Razia orders her to inform everyone that tomorrow the first prince has business in the imperial forest and no one else is to enter. The moment rewinds to the night before. Our boy looks utterly unbothered as Razia loses his mind 3 feet in front of him. Razia demands to know why the hell he should announce entering the forest and then not actually go in. Ran informs him flatly that he simply has business there. Razia snaps back that if Ran needs to go, Ran should just go himself. But the 7th prince has no interest in that plan at all. He explains patient and cold that he does not want anyone knowing his whereabouts. If Razia announces the trip, no one else in the empire will dare set foot in the imperial forest that day, and Ran will have the entire place to himself. Razia turns purple with fury. He demands to know what exactly Ran is scheming and what he could possibly be planning to do in there alone. Ran shrugs and offers a vague half-answer about treatment. Then he adds casually that in the meantime Razia should quietly stay in this room. That is the moment Razia snaps. He lunges at his brother, roaring that this bastard has gone too far, and Ran catches the incoming blow as if it were nothing. Razia leans in close and murmurs that Ran seems to be laboring under the impression that he is still someone important these days. He points out, almost gently, that if he really wanted to, he could just ask the scholars of the empire about a trifling little healing method like this one. Razia's whole face contorts. He warns that Ran is testing the limits of his patience and threatens to end his life right there and now. Ran's smile is thin and vicious. He tells his brother to go ahead and ask the scholars then. Sure, but he had better hurry. Because right on cue, Razia's throat convulses and he doubles over. He coughs blood onto the marble in wet, ugly heaves. His body cannot handle the menace he just wasted trying to hit Ran. Our boy watches him retch and calmly reminds him that if he stops the treatment now, he will not be able to move properly for a full week. Then, in a voice so soft it might as well be discussing the weather, he wonders aloud how the imperial family would actually react. He asks what they would do once the rumor spreads that the first prince has collapsed. Will they scramble to save him? Or will they quietly begin looking for a replacement? If the treatment fails, someone else takes the throne. Razia can barely stay on his knees. He rasps out that Ran is a little worm, and Ran only stares at him with those red-flecked eyes and demands whether his brother still does not understand. Then he leans down and tells Razia, in the coldest voice he can manage, to use his brain if he does not want to die. He adds that maybe it is because they share the same blood, but his patience is not very deep either. And Razia should drop the idea of having people follow him around, because disappearing without a trace happens to be another one of his specialties. It has failed every single time so far. Isn't it about time to give up? It only drags the treatment out and exhausts them both. Razia sags against the floor and his breath is shaking. Finally he asks the question he cannot bear not to ask. He wants to know what exactly Ran's goal here is. Why is he doing any of this? Ran pauses on the question. He tips his head and considers it honestly. And then he answers with one dry word. He guesses that it is survival. And then the moment lifts up into open sky, past treetops, past a lone bird gliding on the wind, and back down into the green depth of the imperial forest itself. The young prince is already walking through it alone. He has combed the whole place 3 times and confirmed there is not a single soul inside, which is exactly what he wanted. There is a reason he was willing to burn every ounce of political capital and drive the first prince into a rage to get this kind of privacy. That reason is that today he plans to experiment. Ever since the horse incident, the possibility has been sitting in the back of his mind that he might not be limited to just crows. If the range of animals he can shift into is broader than he assumed, then this ability is far more powerful than he first thought, and to find out he needs to understand how it actually works. Ran Abiran needs to know, in advance, how it can be used. The fastest thing to test is the transformation trigger, and the simplest theory that keeps coming to mind is physical contact. Because in both cases so far, the crow and the horse, he had touched the animal beforehand. So the plan is straightforward and the smart move is to start small. He should catch a new animal, make contact and see what happens. Ran crouches by a tree and cobbles together a crude little snare. He baits it with the top quality berries he lifted from the imperial kitchen. It is not much of a trap, but the berries alone should do most of the work. Then a rustle in the underbrush stops him cold, and he looks up. There is a squirrel out in the open, before the trap is even finished. He wonders whether he can just catch it directly then. A whole cluster of the little creatures scampers across the roots. The young prince softens visibly at the sight of one particularly bold one that hops right up. He murmurs at it, half warning and half fond, and wonders what it plans to do if a bad person catches it acting this trusting. The squirrel does not care. It scurries onto his hand and nibbles a berry off his palm without a single second of hesitation. Contact is made faster than expected. Our boy takes a breath, plants his feet and tells himself that all right, now it is time to give it a shot. Ran wills the transformation to trigger, and golden light erupts around him and blazes through the clearing, and then the light fades and nothing has happened. He is still standing there, exactly the same shape as before, and he is blinking down at his own two hands with a distinctly unimpressed look on his face. Our boy stands frozen for a long moment, thinking hard, and the answer slowly surfaces. Maybe the situation matters. In every case that has worked so far, he was desperate. He wanted to fly. He wanted to run. He needed it. So what would a squirrel actually want to do? He tries to picture it. He wants to climb a tree. He wants to dive into a hollow. Then he catches himself and wonders whether it even counts if he does not truly mean it from the start. That thought is barely finished before something shifts. A small brown blur drops toward the forest floor with its tail flicking wildly. And the boy who was standing there a heartbeat ago is nowhere to be seen. And then things go sideways, because up in the branches the actual squirrel has clocked its opportunity. It is currently making off with the entire bag of top-quality berries clutched between its little paws. The transformation snaps clean off in a burst of frustration, and Ran surges back to human form just in time to yell after the tiny thief. He shouts at the squirrel to come back and demands to know what it thinks it is doing running off with the whole bag. He tells the creature that if it wanted acorns, all it had to do was ask, and to just give the damn bag back already. Ran runs after the animal, catches the strap of the bag midair, and shouts in triumph that he has got it. The squirrel refuses to let go. It hangs from its end of the bag by two tiny paws and squeaks its head off while Ran hauls on the other end. He stares in disbelief that this little thing can actually withstand him. Ran mutters that all right, fine, let's see who wins here. He really wants to know how long a creature this size can hold out against him. The bag stretches, and then Ran's grip slips and the fight is over in an instant with a very undignified thud as our boy hits the forest floor. Night falls over the Imperial Palace, and Ran finds himself walking back down the long corridor to his own quarters with dust and grass smeared across his uniform jacket. There is a soft knock at the door and the trembling voice of Anna announces that she has brought dinner. He tells her to come in. Anna slips inside carrying a tray while silently praying to whatever gods might listen that she survives this evening. Then she looks up and nearly drops everything. She stammers that the prince's clothes are absolutely ruined. Ran waves her off with a lazy hand and reassures her not to panic, that he just got a little dirty while taking a walk in front of the palace. In his head he is telling a very different story. He admits to himself that today was a disaster, that he almost got caught mid-transformation into a crow. In the end he never even figured out how to transform into a new animal. He just chased that damn squirrel around all day. He tells Anna that his clothes are filthy, so she should bring new ones and prepare a bath before dinner. Anna nods rapidly and answers that of course understood, and then she trails off, because that is when Anna's eyes lock onto the bag hanging from his hand. The bag that is very obviously moving. A furry striped tail flicks out of the opening, and a small brown head pops up with cheeks stuffed to the brim. The squirrel has come home with him. Our boy stares down at it in dawning horror, and mutters internally that this damn squirrel just would not quit. Anna, meanwhile, has jumped to the exact wrong conclusion. Her eyes fill with tears and she gasps that the prince is going to torment the poor animal. She begs him to spare its life and offers to throw it outside herself right now. Ran, jaw tight, cuts her off and orders her to bring the clothes. Anna blinks in confusion. Ran raises his voice and reminds her that he gave her an order a minute ago. He orders her to bring new clothes right now. Anna scrambles into a bow and takes off down the corridor at a dead sprint, muttering to herself that she has to hurry, otherwise cute little Dorami is going to get hurt for sure. She tells the squirrel from a distance to just hold on a little longer, that she is coming back. She rounds a corner without slowing down and slams straight into a wall of white fabric and gold. The wall is a person, and the person is Mentil, the first princess. She is standing in the middle of the corridor with her long honey gold hair loose over her shoulders and a soft unreadable smile on her lips. Anna's blood goes cold. She stammers out a greeting and apologies pour out of her mouth in one long panic stream. Anna begs the first princess to spare her life. Mentil tilts her head with that same soft smile and observes that Anna is the seventh prince's servant. Then she wants to know where Anna is heading in such a hurry. Anna is already on her knees. Mentil's smile does not change as her gaze slides down to the bundle in Anna's arms. She asks, in a tone light as anything, what exactly those clothes are. She wonders whether Anna was secretly stealing imperial property. Anna nearly stops breathing. She swears on Sierra the Great himself that it is absolutely not true. She rushes out the cover story Rand gave her only minutes ago. The seventh prince was taking a walk in the garden, his clothes got dirty, and she is only fetching him fresh ones. Mental listens to all of it patiently, and then her expression cools. She tells Anna gently that it does not matter whether her words are true or false, because deceiving her is impossible anyway. Blue Mana's light coils around her fingertips and drops toward the maid's kneeling form. Mental murmurs to herself that she wonders whether the words this child just spouted were the truth, or an excuse to save her own life. The Manus threads slip into Anna's mind and pull the memory out the way you pull a card from a deck. Mental's eyes flicker, then widen, and she goes very still. She whispers to herself that this cannot be right, that this appearance belongs to someone she knows. And in the reflection of her Manus, Rand's face surfaces, calm and unmistakable. Mental's smile returns, and this one is sharper than before. She murmurs that it seems her dear brother was not in the garden at all. He had business in the imperial forest. The palace bedchamber is quiet. The dome outside the window is silvered by moonlight, and our boy is sitting on the floor trying to reason with a squirrel. He tells the little thief that he honestly does not know how it got all the way here in the first place. But this is not a place for it to live, and he certainly has no intention of keeping it around. Rand offers a compromise. He promises he will help it return to the forest himself, so won't it just let itself be caught quietly and get in the bag? He adds, with a flat warning, that if it does not cooperate, things are going to get a little rough. In his head he is running the whole ridiculous situation past himself and coming up short. Even if it is just a squirrel, a rodent wandering around a human's bedroom, let alone inside the imperial palace itself, makes absolutely no sense. It reminds him too much of when he used to live in that damp semi-basement apartment, lying awake at night listening to rats scratching inside the walls. And now the plot of the story he thought he knew is already diverging slightly from the original novel, which is starting to seriously get on his nerves. The squirrel is not moved by any of it. Our boy loses patience and his hand shoots out in one clean grab. He snatches the little creature up mid-scamper and demands to know what kind of trouble it thinks it is trying to cause here. Then he tells it firmly that now it is going to be a good squirrel and get in the bag. The squirrel disagrees. It squeaks its head off and sinks its tiny teeth straight into his hand. Rand flinches, and the moment his grip loosens, the squirrel is gone. It scurries across the floor in a blur of brown. He shakes his stinging hand and shouts after the little brat and demands to know how a tiny thing dares to bite the hand of royalty. It bolts up the tall shelving along the wall and stops only when it is far above his head, perched right at the top where he cannot possibly reach. He stares up at the height and admits dryly that it really did climb up high this time. If he tries to climb up after it, it will just leap somewhere else, and this whole comedy repeats forever, which is when a very different idea slides into his head. At times like this, it might just be easier if he transformed into a squirrel himself. He sighs and mutters that even thinking about it out loud sounds absurd, and then something inside him locks into place. A single eye widens as he feels the familiar heat crawl up his spine, and a soft, startled sound catches in his throat. Rand whispers to himself to wait just a minute, because this feeling, he knows this feeling, could it really be? And then it is. Golden light wraps around his body and pulls him down small. By the time it fades, a palm-sized squirrel is standing where the seventh prince used to be. It blinks down at its own tiny paws with an expression that is somehow both smug and outraged at the same time. The realization crashes over him. He has finally figured it out. This is the condition for transforming into a specific animal. It was never simple contact. When he grabbed the squirrel a minute ago, he had wrapped his fingers around the exact spot at the back of its little neck, and that was the trigger. He has to touch the nape of the neck to make the transformation work. Our boy allows himself one small victorious smirk in squirrel form. Then he does what any squirrel would do and launches himself off the shelf at full confidence. What squirrels do not do, apparently, is stick the landing from that height. He drops in a hopeless little arc with his tail flailing, and thuds against the floor with a very undignified squeak. That is exactly when the bedroom door opens. Anna is standing in the doorway clutching a bundle. Her mouth is already open in a horrified squeak about how she wanted to check first. That this is the seventh prince's private bedchamber. That she should have asked first. Mental, the first princess, sweeps into the room the way a slow blade unsheathes. She turns a cold glance on Anna and demands to know if this child is honestly telling her to walk on eggshells around her own little brother right now. Her gaze drifts across the floor and lands on the palm-sized brown squirrel currently trying its best to look like an innocent forest animal. Mental murmurs to herself, in that same silken tone, wondering what on earth this thing is. It is a common little squirrel. She exhales the way someone would if the world had personally disappointed them. Mental observes aloud that even if the boy is a child treated poorly by the imperial family, to think that wild beasts are now roaming freely around a royal's residence. Anna meanwhile has completely misread the room. Her eyes shine as she gasps in a hushed voice that this is double the cuteness. From his tiny helpless position on the floor, the squirrel who is really the seventh prince stares up at both of them and mutters internally that seriously, this is driving him crazy. The next day dawns clear over the palace. The seventh prince is stretched out on his own furniture with a very familiar little companion perched happily on his hand, munching a nut. He looks down at the squirrel with something between fondness and exasperation, and remarks out loud that he cannot believe this guy. The thing has not left his side since last night. Our boy wonders whether it is doing this because it somehow knows he saved it. He warns the creature that it is going to be a real hassle to take it all the way back to the forest. So it had better make sure it stays out of sight on its own from now on. Anyway, he says more to himself than to the squirrel. At least he has figured out how his ability actually works. And to think it was such a ridiculously specific condition. Ran runs it back in his head. The crow he transformed into first, and later the black horse, and now the squirrel too. All three shared one crucial thing in common right before the transformation. It was never just simple contact. He had to precisely touch the nape of the neck. The activation condition, he mutters, is ridiculously specific for something as useless as this ability sometimes feels. But he figured it out anyway, so he can move on. That is not actually the problem worth worrying about. The real problem is the first princess, Mentil Abiron herself. He admits to himself that he could not quite picture her just from the descriptions in the novel. But he certainly did not think she would be a character capable of pulling off an expression that terrifying up close. Thankfully, Anna had jumped in and covered for him by claiming the squirrel was his personal pet. That single lie gave him the exact seconds he needed to slip out of the window in squirrel form and disappear. It was a really close call. Ran returned to human form and came back to his own room through the front door as if nothing had happened. And for a moment he thought everything was going to end perfectly well. Then Mental had spoken again. In that gentle, unbothered voice, she had observed that wild beasts inside the palace. Well, the seventh prince certainly has unusual tastes. She had smiled that soft smile and said that it was getting late, so she would leave for tonight. Ran had already been opening his mouth to say yes please, next time come only when. And that was when her voice went hard. She spoke the word tomorrow the way one speaks a verdict. Mental looked at him and instructed him to come find her where she was staying, because they have matters to discuss. Now, sitting in his own chair the next morning with the squirrel happily eating stolen nuts by his feet, Ran folds his arms and stares at the ceiling. He asks himself the obvious question. Did Mental actually figure it out after all? What on earth does she want to talk about? Did she somehow discover his true identity? He tells himself no way, that is not possible. But what choice does he have? It is not like he can refuse a summons from the first princess. Ran glances down at the squirrel and asks it, half joking and half desperate, whether he is right, squirrel. The walkover is short, but the doors at the end are not. A knight in polished armor greets him with a formal welcome and informs the seventh prince that Her Highness the First Princess is waiting inside her private chambers. Ran looks up at the enormous doors and thinks to himself that he remembered the description in the novel calling them grand. But these are truly massive doors. Then they swing open, and there she is. Mental is seated on an elegant chair in the center of the receiving hall with her arms folded across her lap. Her wheat gold hair is braided high and cascades over one shoulder. She greets him with a warm, brittle smile and says he must have had a long journey. Mental spreads one hand toward the chair opposite her and remarks that his legs must be tired, so please have a seat. Our boy decides to try to steer this straight to the point. He continues that more importantly, he would like to know for what reason she has called him here. Her voice cuts across his own the way a blade drops. She wants to know, very softly, whether he did not hear her when she told him to sit. The corner of the room goes still. Ran feels the hair at the back of his neck lift. He stands frozen for one long beat with a dry throat. Then he bows his head just a fraction and answers quietly. He apologizes for the misstep and asks her to please forgive his rudeness. Mental's smile returns, sweet as anything, and she waves it off with a lazy hand. She says it is fine and that his curiosity must have gotten the better of him. He always was the impatient sort. But then her tone shifts. Mental wonders aloud since when that child became a completely different person. She asks since when he started venturing alone into the imperial forest, of all places, a corner of the empire he had never once visited before. Rand's shoulders tighten under his shirt and his internal voice mutters that this, exactly this, is why he had not wanted to face the first princess. because in the world of the novel that used to be his favorite book, Manus always manifests as an ability tied to nature. The Emperor wields fire. The first Prince Razia wields water. Every royal Manus is an elemental force pulled straight from the natural world. And then there is Mental. Her Manus, in a sense, stands above all of them. Her element is not a piece of nature at all. Her element is human. Mental can read the mind of anyone in front of her, and she can bend it if she chooses. Sitting across from him now, she tilts her head with that same warm, brittle smile and tells him she hopes he will be honest with her. Because it makes her very sad, she says, when her lovely family tries to deceive her. Rand keeps his face perfectly still and screams inside his own head to stay calm. Just stay calm. He knows one thing for sure and he clings to it. Her ability does not work on him. Rand is certain of that. If it did, she would have simply reached into his mind and pulled every answer she wanted out of it, and this entire conversation would not need to happen. Which means at some point recently she must have realized that her ability had stopped working on him, and now she has to interrogate him the old-fashioned way. Thanks to the novel, our boy also knows the exact 2 conditions under which her ability fails. First, the target must be related to her by blood. Second, the target must genuinely love Mental Abiran as family. The first condition is easy. The 7th prince's body is her actual little brother, and their shared blood should trigger the failure just fine. The second condition is where he cannot make the math work. There is absolutely no way he would ever feel something like familial love for this woman. Across the table, Mental's patience is visibly thinning. Mental wonders, with dangerous softness, whether he would kindly hurry up and answer her already, and in the middle of trying to think of a lie that will hold, Rand silently panics over the one question he cannot answer for himself. Then why on earth doesn't her ability work on him? Somewhere far from the Imperial Palace, in a place carved out of stone and silence, water drips. It falls one bead at a time from the roof of a dark cave and taps against a bearded face streaked with dried blood. The old man in the black officer's coat lies motionless on the damp floor with his eyes closed and his breathing shallow. Then a droplet strikes his temple and his eyelid finally trembles. He drags his eyes open. Nothing focuses at first. He blinks slowly, again and again, and tries to understand the dark stone above him. His whole body aches in a way that suggests he has been recently taken apart and put back together several times. Duke Fetus lets out a low groan and tries to make sense of where he is. Is this Terratum, the paradise he was taught only the good could reach? It seems too damp for that. Fetus must have fallen from that cliff and by some impossible luck survived. He tries to lift himself and manages half a motion, groaning through gritted teeth. That is when a low voice cuts through the darkness behind him and remarks calmly that he survived. Duke Fetus's blurred vision drags itself upward and finds a tall silhouette wrapped in a rough hooded cloak, standing just inside the reach of the faint light. He cannot see the face clearly. He can see the sword. The hooded figure lifts a well-honed silver blade and lets the tip catch the dim light. He tells the old man, in a voice too flat to be gentle, that he shall now begin asking his questions. Duke Fetus's blood runs cold. The tip of the sword hovers just under his chin, and the man asks him a single sharp thing. He asks whether he is a person loyal to the Abiran Empire. Duke gasps out the only thing his voice will manage and asks what the meaning of all this is. Golden eyes finally lift beneath the shadow of the hood. They fix on him without a flicker of warmth. The hooded man tells the old duke, in that same terrible even voice, that his answer had better be yes or no, because that answer will determine how he proceeds from here. Rand keeps his face carefully still while inside his head the same question loops over and over. Her ability isn't working on him. He keeps asking himself why it isn't working, because if it did, this whole horrible conversation would already be over, and she finally speaks. Mental asks him softly whether he will give her an answer. She wants to know why he has suddenly become such a completely different person. Our boy searches for solid ground and does not find any. If her ability isn't working, there has to be a clean reason for it. Could it have something to do with the fact that he is possessing this character? To begin with, the 7th prince was such an insignificant background figure in the original novel that there was hardly any information written about him. He is barely mentioned at all. Mental tilts her head with a soft little laugh and tells him she can practically hear the gears turning inside his head. She supposes it must be so difficult for him to come up with an answer. Rand clenches his jaw and asks himself internally what he should do here. Maybe he should just play dumb. But he already knows the answer to that. There is no chance she is going to let this go just like that. Rand needs to think fast. He needs to picture what the actual 7th prince, the sullen doomed side character from the novel, would say in this exact spot. Mental hums under her breath and observes that since it seems he has no intention of answering her, she supposes she will have to try another method. Rand's stomach drops. He can only stare at her as she raises one graceful hand and calls, coolly, for the Imperial Knights to come inside. Two armored knights step through the tall doors, drop to a knee, and ask how they may serve Her Highness. Mental sighs the way a mother would when disappointed by a stubborn child. She tells them, in that same silken voice, that it is truly frustrating when her own dear little brother refuses to speak with her. So, she says, in order to get him to talk, why don't the good knights slit Ranabiran's mouth open with their swords? The two knights freeze in place. Then their heads snap up in horror. They stammer that Her Highness, it is the seventh prince, and they cannot possibly do such a thing. They ask how lowly servants like them could ever do such a terrible thing. They beg her to please reconsider the order. Mental's smile does not move at all. She simply informs them, softly, that they are making far too much noise, and that she absolutely despises noise. Blue light coils around her hand, spills across her fingertips, and drops into the two knights the way a stone drops into still water. Their eyes go glassy. Their objections cut off mid-word. The change is immediate and complete. They rise as if pulled up by strings and draw their swords with dead expressions. Then they step forward and level the tips of their blades directly at Rand's mouth. From somewhere behind the emptiness in their eyes, one of them mutters faintly, asking what the meaning of this is. But it is only an echo. Their hands are no longer their own. Mental watches with a mild expression, arms folded across her lap, and remarks that, well, he refuses to answer, so it cannot be helped, can it? Then she warns him to choose his next words very carefully, because the only way for him to get out of this is to speak. Rand cuts her off. His voice comes out ragged and he blurts the first sentence he can force past his teeth. He says that his mother has passed away. The blades hover an inch from his face. Silence lands hard across the room. The corner of Mental's mouth lifts into a small satisfied curve. Very softly, she wants to know what he is talking about. The seventh prince keeps his eyes lowered and asks himself internally what makes him think his mother is really dead. She asks whether he has been in contact with her all this time. Our boy shakes his head slowly and answers no, that's not it, he just means it. And then he starts spinning the lie he had already prepared inside his head. He can do this because our boy is an avid reader who has read this novel more than 100 times, and he knows the character of Mental Abiran better than most people alive. Rand tells her that before his mother left the Imperial Palace, she left one single item behind with him. It was a beautiful necklace with a blue gemstone set at its center. He explains that his mother had said that as long as the blue light inside the stone did not fade, the two of them would be able to meet again someday. But a while ago, he continues, the blue light slowly began to dim on its own. And then one day, without any warning at all, the stone turned black and shattered. After a brief moment of panic, a single thought crossed his mind. His mother, who had longed for her homeland her entire life, had finally been laid to rest back in the eastern country of her birth. Inside his own head, our boy is muttering that this is a blatant lie from start to finish. Not a single word of it is true, but he keeps his face perfectly composed and lets Mental listen. The reason this fabrication is safe is that everything around it is real. The seventh prince's mother is famous inside the imperial family in exactly one way. Among the many mistresses who bore the emperor's children, she was the only one who ever escaped from the imperial family. The reason for her escape was never revealed on the page. It was only presumed that she returned to her hometown in the east. Some whispered that it was because she had given birth to a black-haired prince with no manners, and she could not bear the shame. But regardless of what really happened, she never once appears again anywhere in the novel until the very end. Which is exactly why Rand can use her as an excuse with such peace of mind. There is no one left who can possibly contradict him. Across the table, Mental narrows her eyes just slightly and inquires in a lower voice whether, if she remembers correctly, he did not resent his biological mother. Our boy tips his head as if truly thinking about it. He admits honestly that he isn't really sure. When he was young, he only resented her for leaving him behind. But perhaps, he goes on quietly, the real reason he had always caught himself gazing toward the eastern sky was different than he thought. Perhaps the reason he had quietly taken out the necklace every single night was because he had missed her all along. Rand lets the necklace slip out from between his fingers and dangle for her to see. It is a small blue stone on a delicate silver chain, catching the light. Mental's expression shifts. Her voice softens. She wonders gently whether all of this changed his mind about his remaining blood relatives. Rand does not answer that right away. Mental goes on studying the necklace with something between wonder and hunger. She murmurs that it is truly fascinating. To think that a lifetime of resentment could turn into pure longing in a single moment. Rand keeps his voice level and answers that perhaps that is just what family is. That is what he thinks, at least. Mental says nothing for a long beat. Then without warning, she turns her head slightly and speaks over her shoulder. She orders the two knights to sheath their swords and step outside the room to stand by. The knights, still empty-eyed, mumble their understanding and begin backing away. And then Mental raises her hand one more time. Her fingertips glow soft blue and she tells them that everything that happened inside this room, they will erase completely from their memories. The Manhwa's threads sink in. The knights lower their heads and walk out remembering nothing. When they are gone, Mental rises from her seat, crosses the space between them in two soft steps and reaches out. She takes both of Rand's hands in her own. Her voice comes down as soft as silk and she tells him that he must have suffered a great deal emotionally to carry all of this on his own. Mental murmurs against the top of his head that even if he is a black-haired failure of a prince, he is still her little younger brother. Rand from very close range cannot decide whether she is genuinely moved or just messing with him for sport. Her ability to bend any human being to her will is absolute, and besides, from the very beginning, the seventh prince was never on the first princess's side of the imperial family to begin with. So of course she came for him. Rand glances down at the little blue stone still hanging from his fingers and lets himself enjoy exactly one honest thought. This is just a cheap accessory he found lying around somewhere in the palace. It is not the real necklace. There is no real necklace. There never was. And now the terrifying first princess of the Abiran Empire has taken it into her elegant hands the way one takes a holy relic. Later, walking back to his own wing of the palace with his heart still hammering, our boy lets his mind drift. There is one other loose thread that has been bothering him ever since the hunting tournament ended. He wants to know what actually happened to Duke Fetus. In the original novel, the old Duke falls down a valley after the closing ritual and loses the use of his legs. He is supposed to survive down there and eventually meet the true protagonist of the story. Far away from the imperial palace, deep inside the dark cave carved out beneath the cliff, Duke Fetus lets out a shaking groan as he tries to shift his weight. He grabs his knee and grits his teeth against the pain. From the shadows in front of him, the hooded man with the drawn sword speaks in that same flat, terrible voice. He warns the old duke that it would probably be best not to move recklessly right now. He lifts the tip of his blade and lets it glint in the low light. Then he informs the old veteran, calmly and without any pity at all, that his right leg is broken. Duke does not stand a single chance against the man in front of him in his current state. Even through the darkness of the cave he can tell. That is a flawless combat stance. That is a razor-sharp sword point, and every instinct he has honed across 40 years of battle is screaming the same thing at him. This hooded stranger is incredibly, terrifyingly strong. Duke Fetus's voice comes out unsteady. He stammers a request for the young man to please wait a moment and put that sword away first. He wants to know what exactly is going on here right now. The hooded man does not lower the blade. He simply observes in that same low voice that he supposes the old man has not been awake for very long. Then he starts explaining. A few days ago, he says, he had spotted a strange sphere of water crossing the sky. He had tried to chase after it, but it was moving far too fast, and he ended up losing sight of it. From the way it was moving, it looked as though someone was trapped inside. But since it had smashed into the ground at that incredible speed, whoever was inside must have been blown to pieces on impact. Duke Fetus's blood goes cold as the pieces slot together. He knows exactly what the young man is describing. That was the very sphere that carried Duke Fetus off the cliff in front of the entire imperial court. He rasps out the question aloud, half in disbelief, and wants to know how he is still alive. Duke runs the possibilities in his head, and one thought surfaces quickly and holds. Could it be that damned bag of stones? The one the seventh prince had pressed into his hands during the hunting tournament. The weight that had dragged him down through the water and down the cliff. He gropes at his own waist and confirms the truth of it. The bag is gone. It must have torn loose somewhere during the fall. The hooded man continues speaking, calmly, as if none of this shakes him. He tells the old man that by chance he had found him not long after, collapsed and covered in blood inside a nearby cave, and then his sword lifts a hair and the tone shifts. The blade catches the low light and hovers just under the duke's chin. The hooded stranger declares, in a voice much colder now, that he will now ask his question in the name of God Amika. He asks whether the duke is loyal to the Abiran Empire. Duke Fetus's breath catches in his throat at the sound of that name. He knows exactly who Amika is. Amika is not a god of the empire. Amika is the god worshipped by the heretics, the enemies of everything the imperial family stands for. Of all the people that fate could have set in front of him at his weakest moment, the duke thinks with a hollow laugh. It had to be a heretics, because the moment slides open, and 40 years of memory come pouring through the gap. There is a carriage rolling past a roadside where a small child lay beaten to death for touching what belonged to the imperial family. There is a version of the Duke who did not lift the corpse because touching it would defile him, and by his side stood his small son Flynn, watching everything with careful, thoughtful eyes. The boy had remarked calmly on how truly exemplary it was, an imperial dog who does not even blink when his aide is on the verge of death. Only the boy's voice in memory sounds a little too much like the young hooded man's now. Someone had told him once that your son will surely grow up to be a loyal imperial dog as well, and there at the very back of memory is the moment the Duke had held on to for years. Duke was standing in his estate with a hand on the boy's small shoulder, calling him his son Flynn and his proud treasure. He had told him to follow in his father's footsteps and grow up to become the sword of the imperial family. Its great sword statue of the first Emperor Sierra rose toward the ceiling, with the Duke and his tiny son standing together at its base and listening to the priests thunder out the sacred command. The priests had ordered them to eradicate all the heretics threatening the empire. The Duke exhales one long ragged breath. He lets his shoulders drop. He lets the terror of a battle-hardened veteran facing his own death settle onto his face. Duke looks up at the hooded man with tired eyes and a soft, slow smile. He just lost his footing while wandering carelessly around the cliffside, that is all. Deep inside the cave, the old Duke has decided to play the long game. Duke Fetus limps along behind the hooded stranger with the drawn sword. His ankle is bound with rope, and he tells the young man in a hoarse voice that he really does appreciate the young man treating his broken leg. But at this point he says he won't even ask where they are being taken. He asks whether the good hooded stranger could at least loosen the rope around his left ankle. It is difficult to walk when the thing keeps catching on every root. Rattle does not even turn his head. Duke Fetus tries again. He points out gently that the young man may not fully understand yet, but at the Duke's age one bad fall can be catastrophic. And if that happens, wouldn't it just be more trouble for the young man to drag him along? The hooded stranger continues walking in perfect silence with his sword balanced at his shoulder. He does not offer a single word in reply. The old Duke lets out a strangled internal groan. He is being completely and thoroughly ignored. Still, walking behind the stranger gives him time to think, and his mind is already turning the way a war room map turns. To think there was a cave like this hidden near the imperial forest all along. He had clearly heard the young man mention Amica earlier. Amica was the heretic sect that the empire itself boasted about wiping out over 50 years ago. He wonders whether they have really been hiding down here in this cave the whole time. Duke tries to sharpen his memory of the moments just before he blacked out. He thinks he had been launched westward from the central watchtower of the forest. Or maybe it was southwest. If he can just pinpoint the direction, then once he escapes he will be able to locate this cave on a map. For now he thinks he needs to focus on memorizing the interior of the cave itself so that he can return here later with reinforcements. Right in the middle of that thought, he catches himself, and a small dry laugh escapes him at how absurd this all is. To think a traitor to the imperial family, a man who just openly denied his loyalty a few hours ago, is still thinking like the imperial knight commander. Ahead of him, the hooded stranger finally speaks. He asks the old man his name. Duke Fetus opens his mouth to spin a lie and gets halfway to a stammered opening. Then, without really deciding to, he tells the truth. He gives his name as Agony Fetus. The words leave his mouth before he can pull them back. Rattle stops walking. He remarks that he was honestly a little surprised when he first found him. This cave, he explains, is protected by a divine blessing. It is not a place that just anyone can enter by their own will. Especially not someone from the Abiran Empire. Then he drives the tip of his sword straight into the stone floor of the cave, and something enormous stirs beneath it. Golden light erupts up around the blade in a slow spiral and tears outward through the rock the way ink tears through water. The air in the cave splits open. The Duke jerks back in shock and cannot even find breath enough to gasp. Something huge is about to happen. He does not know what. The wall of the cave in front of them simply comes apart. Loose stones drift up into the air as if gravity has decided to take a moment off. And beyond the broken wall, the entire world opens up. Sitting under a warm evening sky is a hidden imperial city. There are pale domes and towers. There are statues lining the colonnades. It is a vast, silent, secret sanctuary, tucked away behind the divine wards of a god the empire officially killed half a century ago. The hooded stranger stands at the edge of it and speaks to Duke Fetus quietly. He explains that there are only two possible reasons a man from the empire could have found his way here. Either he is a minion sent to exterminate them, or he has come at the calling of God Amica. Radel finally pulls his hood back. Golden eyes fix on the old Duke without flinching. Either way, he says, "Welcome to Amica's domain." Far away and back inside the imperial palace, our boy is having a much less mystical evening. Racia is doubled over in his ceremonial chair, gasping through the last stage of tonight's treatment as blue manus threads coil around him and drain something dark out of his body. Ran works with his sleeves pushed up and his expression flat. He thinks hard the whole time. The timeline of the story is now moving faster than the original novel. If that's the case, it is honestly better for old Duke Fetus and the true protagonist to start moving sooner as well. With any luck, the 7th prince is going to start hearing news about the protagonist soon. He does allow himself one small twinge of guilt for making the poor old Duke suffer needlessly, but only one. Blue Manus snaps around Raisha's chest with a hard crack. The first prince curses under his breath and rounds on Ran, snapping at him about why he only brought this much for tonight. Razia demands to know why he can't bring more so he can heal faster. Ran, without changing tone, asks him coolly if he just yelled. Razia sags back and sighs that no, that is just frustration talking, that is all. He wants to know how much longer he is going to have to keep up this damn treatment. Ran tells him, as he has told him 100 times, that rushing the process will destroy his body. He needs to be patient and take it slow. Razia mutters and wants to know whether there is some faster method somewhere. And that is when Ran allows himself a small, precise smile. He points out that there is something else more dangerous to Raisha's body than this treatment. Raisha blinks at him and wants to know what on earth he is talking about now. And Ran reminds him very sweetly that on the very first day Raisha barged into his room half dying, Raisha himself had said that if Ran was so worried he should give up his hookah first. So Ran suggests, closing his eyes with a peaceful smile, since the hookah is bad for his health anyway, wouldn't it be a good idea for him to just quit it? Raisha stares at him. He curses him. Later, in the quiet after Raisha storms off, Ran allows himself to think honestly. The hookah really is destroying his half-brother's body. So is the wine he keeps drinking. So is the rich imperial dinner he ate an hour ago. Almost everything the first prince consumes is practically poison to him now. Raisha Abaran is destined to depend on this treatment every single day until he dies, unless the seed that was planted inside his body is dealt with. Ran shuts the case with the treatment materials and reminds himself out loud that they should wrap up here. They cannot be late for the evening ritual. The monthly Manus ritual convenes inside the great hall around the prasa. Raisha strides out to the ancient triangular tablet and channels his water Manus into its corner. For the first time in months, the pillar of blue light reaches wide across the ceremonial table, with tendrils spiraling out through the air in ankh-shaped runes. Beside him, Selos, the 8th prince, cheers with the excitement of a puppy at the sight and calls out to his brother that he is truly amazing, exactly as expected. At the head of the table, the aging emperor watches the light spread across the room with his usual unreadable expression. When Rasia finally steps back, the emperor lifts his voice and tells the assembly that if there are no more challengers, they will conclude tonight's ritual here. Everyone begins rising from their seats. Ran remains sitting a moment longer and thinks to himself that he will simply wait until everyone else is cleared out, so that he can leave last without drawing any of the other royals' attention. That plan lasts about 6 seconds. Because Selos has spotted him, and Selos, who lives in fear of the older siblings, always finds courage to swing down at Ran instead. He plants a hand on Ran's shoulder and calls him Black Bug. Selos demands to know why Ran is still just sitting there, and whether he did not hear that the ritual is over. Then, out of pure meanness, Selos leans in and mocks whether Ran is sitting there brooding about his birth mother, the one who abandoned him when he was little. Ran opens his mouth to reply, and then a soft silken voice drops into the space above them, and Selos loses all his color at once. Mental is standing right there. It is the first princess herself, and she is looking directly at Ran. Selos stammers out at once that, Your Highness, he definitely was not doing anything. Please, whatever this looks like, he was not. Ran keeps his own face perfectly composed and rises to bow. He greets the first princess. Then Mentil says the words that just about stop Selos's heart. She asks Ran, in front of everyone still lingering in the hall, whether he is feeling unwell. Ran chooses his answer with great care. He answers her no, not at all. Isn't the ritual usually a little boring anyway? Mental hums softly and says that it is a relief to hear that then. She reminds him that even if the ritual isn't particularly entertaining, it is still an event of great significance, so it would be best not to make it too obvious that he finds it a bother. Then, still smiling, she tells him she will see him next time, and she leaves. Selos is now openly panicking. He grabs at Ran's sleeve, half shaking, and hisses at him to wait a minute. He wants to know why the first princess is asking about the well-being of someone like him. Ran thinks internally to himself that this whole thing has now become even more bothersome than it needed to be. That is when another voice cuts across the noise, calm and older and slightly amused. It calls out to Selos and asks whether there is some sort of problem with Ran. Silos jerks upright and squeaks a greeting to your highness, because standing right there is Dido, the second prince, the one who is always somewhere near the first prince's shoulder, and who has never once in his life bothered to look directly at the seventh prince. Rand tells them in that same measured voice that it is nothing at all. He was merely exchanging a few pleasantries with his younger brother. Then he turns his eyes on Silos and tells him that he must be a busy man, so he will take his leave. Rand and Dido pass each other back to back in silence. Which brings us to the shadowy corridor moments later, where the small ambitious 8th prince is currently making the second worst decision of his short life. Silos has cornered our boy against a wall with a small flame of fire manis burning in his palm. He is demanding to know what the hell Ran actually is. Silos glares at Ran with narrowed golden eyes and wants to know why both the first princess and the first prince have suddenly started paying such careful attention to a black-haired failure like him. He orders Rand to spit out the truth right now, or he will burn him to ashes on the spot. Rand does not even flinch. He tips his head to one side and mildly wonders whether that would really put the 8th prince in a rather difficult position. Silos wants to know what on earth Rand is talking about. And that is when the 7th prince calmly slides the knife in. He points at the little flame in Silos's palm. He remarks that trying to burn a person to ashes with a manis flame that can barely light an oil lamp is honestly going to take an extremely long time. Rand wonders aloud, in the sweetest voice he has used all day, what would happen if others in the imperial family somehow found out about this level of ability. It probably wouldn't be very good for the 8th prince, would it? Silos's whole face drops. He stammers out, how did Rand even know? Somewhere in the twilight a man screams. His throat rips out broken grunts of pain as unseen hands hold him down and shove some kind of gag between his teeth. His face contorts in the flickering firelight, wide-eyed and helpless. The flames climb higher, and his silhouette thrashes against them the way a shadow puppet thrashes in its final act. This is Duke Agony Fetus, once the Empire's most loyal sword, and now a nameless criminal on the eve of his end. A cold voice reads out the decree above the crowd. It declares that Agony Fetus is a man who never existed. There will be no funeral, no grave, no monument by which he may be remembered. Anyone who violates this shall be punished severely. Torch after torch strikes the pyre and the fire climbs higher into the reddening sky. Silhouettes of the Empire's commoners crowd forward to watch a house's honor burn along with the man. In the front row, a young man in a plain shirt lifts his torch and touches it to the flames. Weeks pass and the story picks up inside the polished marble halls of the Fetus estate. A knock lands sharp against Talon's office door. From outside, a voice calls out that acting head, he has a report. It belongs to Jack, commander of the Fetus Knights. Jack is a broad silver-haired veteran with a thick mustache and a chest lined with medals. He steps inside and delivers his report crisply. As ordered, they have apprehended those spreading false rumors within the Second Night Order. They have held them accountable, cut off their wrists and expelled them. The punishment for the remaining offenders has also been carried out. Jack apologizes and admits they have been so short-handed his men have been working through the nights. Then he hands over what Talon requested. It is the list of deserters. Talon unrolls the page and skims down it. Jack informs him that they are tightening security to stop the runaways, but nearly half their manpower has already deserted. Even the families that once served House Fetus have cut ties with them. If discipline among the staff collapses as well, the Fetus family is finished. Then Jack, cautiously, floats his real question. He wonders whether erasing every trace of Duke Fetus isn't going too far. He worries it will only provoke those who remain loyal to the Duke. Talon asks whether Jack really thinks Agony Fetus is still the head of the Fetus family, and the flatness in his voice cuts harder than any raised tone would. Jack lowers his eyes and offers his apologies to the acting head. He admits that he too, for a time, struggled to accept that the Duke, or rather that man, could meet such a dishonorable end. Jack murmurs a question about how someone so loyal could do such a thing. He says it is as though he is standing before an entirely different person. Jack wonders if the Duke has changed this much. Talon answers without expression that it is because he feels betrayed by the Duke. The room stills. Talon sets down his pen and lays his palm flat against the deserter list. He announces softly that it is time and they should be on their way. Footsteps echo down the marble stairs of the estate as he descends beside his aide. Pale reports that everything is prepared. Talon acknowledges the update. Out in the great square a crowd has already gathered. Servants of every rank stand shoulder to shoulder before the platform, and hushed voices ripple through the mass. One of them whispers and wonders what on earth Talon is planning to say after gathering everyone here. Another leans in and murmurs that yesterday some kids who worked in the kitchen were caught talking carelessly and had their tongues cut out. He He wonders how they are supposed to live like this. Someone else guesses aloud that the master must be afraid of them being branded a family of traitors and asks whether they shouldn't leave before it is too late. The murmurs sink into a fearful hush as Talon steps up onto the platform. His voice carries even in its quiet, and it opens with a line every soul in the Empire already knows. He announces that House Fetus has served Sierra the Great since its founding. For over 1,000 years it has enjoyed the honor of standing beside the imperial family as its closest guardian. However, the situation has grown chaotic of late. He is sure everyone gathered here knows full well what the cause of that is. Then he says the name Agony Fetus aloud. He calls him a traitor who betrayed the imperial family. Behind his glasses his eyes do not waver. Talon goes on that this single fact has shaken the wealth, unity and honor this house built over 1,000 years and shaken it down to their very roots. Even among those gathered here now, he knows there are many who doubt the loyalty of House Fetus, but he asks them to remember something. His voice hardens as he lifts his gaze across the square. He declares that House Fetus still has someone who will uphold its 1,000-year oath. As acting head of House Fetus until young Lord Flen Fetus succeeds as Duke, Talon will continue proving their loyalty to the Empire and the Imperial family, and anyone who abandons their loyalty to this house, he warns, will receive no mercy whatsoever. Off to the side, Jack flinches as if struck by the sudden weight of the speech. He admits inwardly that Talon's tone is somewhat threatening, but Lord Talon is right. House Fetus still has a legitimate heir, which means there are still countless opportunities to prove their loyalty to His Majesty. Sometime after the speech, a convoy of fetus carriages rolls out through the green hills toward the temple grounds. Inside the lead carriage, Talon sits alone with his thoughts. He wonders silently whether it was truly worth that much to the Duke. He watches the road slip past through the window. Though he will never know his old master's true intentions now, there is only one thought left in his mind. Talon refuses to let Duke's death be in vain. He asks the man silently to watch over the land he entrusted, and to witness what Talon makes of it. The carriage rolls to a stop and Talon steps down into the shadow of a towering white cathedral. He murmurs to himself that so this is the temple. It is magnificent. Even though he has only been given a year, he thinks quietly to himself. Talon climbs to a high vantage overlooking the city, and the roar of the crowds below rises to meet him the way a distant tide meets the shore. From up here an ocean of dark heads and hushed noise seems to stretch beyond the horizon, yet not a single face turns to look up. Talon's expression sharpens. He resolves inwardly that even if it takes everything he has, he will never let things unfold the way the first prince intends. Far from that platform, inside a warm chamber lit by imperial chandeliers, a young royal in a white ceremonial uniform lounges lazily as an attendant briefs him on Talon's speech. This is Selos Abiran, the 8th prince, and he has been listening with a growing smirk. His smirk twists into open cruelty. He tells his attendant that whenever he sees swarms of insects gathered like this, he gets the urge to crush them beneath his feet. Meanwhile, far from all of this, our boy trudges through the underbrush of the imperial forest. Ran Abiran, the 7th prince, is dressed in his dark navy hunting uniform with gold trim. Ran is well into the medium-sized animal zone by his own reckoning. He has already secured enough small animals like foxes and rodents for whatever quiet purposes he has in mind, so it might be time to start aiming for bigger prey. Then he notices something padding along behind him again, and his mouth tightens in dry exasperation. He calls the little punk out for sneaking after him yet again. Our boy lifts Jeremy off the ground and holds the tiny brown and cream squirrel at eye level. He tells her gently that this place is far more dangerous than the small-sized animal zone. Jeremy squeaks in furious protest, but he does not back down. Ran also mutters to himself in dry disbelief that he checked the bag and she was not in it, so how on earth did she get in? He wonders aloud, half joking and half not, whether this little guy could have been transmigrated into the novel too. Following the tracks pays off after over an hour of quiet stalking through the trees. Our boy lowers himself into a crouch and asks the silence around him whether he has finally found it. A low wet growl drifts through the undergrowth. From behind a thicket, a wolf-like beast bares long ragged teeth into the air. He plasters on his politest smile and greets the beast warmly. Ran assures it that his intentions are humble, and that it is nothing much because he just wants to quietly touch its nape and leave. He touched the other animals easily enough, so this one should be the same, he figures. The beast lunges. Its jaws yawn open into a monstrous grin lined with fangs, and its yellow moon eyes blaze straight at his face. The strike tears through the air with a wet screaming shriek and comes within a hair of his throat. Ran asks the sky faintly whether his wrist is going to survive this. Our boy is bolting through the imperial forest with Darami clutched in one hand, and behind him the wolf is closing fast. He shrieks in raw panic and is completely undone, because seriously, at this rate he is really going to die. Between one crashing footstep and the next he manages to spit out at the little squirrel in his fist and wants to know why on earth she did that. Darami squeaks back at him without a shred of remorse, because a moment earlier, everything had actually been going fine. Just like the other animals, this wolf too had turned out to be friendly. Our boy had gently touched its nape and muttered a soft good boy, and he had just been about to slip quietly away. That was when Darami, for reasons unknown even to the gods, decided to pick a fight with a wall of teeth and fur. Now our boy is sprinting for his life while snarling at her that if she wants to die, she can go ahead and die by herself. What in the world does he transform into now though? The wolf is right on his heels. No matter which land animal he picks, that beast will catch up, and he does not have enough time to fully shift into a crow and fly away, since the takeoff alone would take too long. If only he could run and fly at the same time. If only he could just fly. And then it happens. Darami squeaks in his hand at just the right instant, and something clicks. Skin between his arms and his sides stretches out into a wide feathery membrane. Fur ripples over his body. In a blink our boy is airborne. He is now a flying squirrel gliding away from the wolf's snapping jaws in a smooth downward arc against the bright open sky. The beast skids to a stop at the edge of the drop and snarls up at him uselessly. Anyway, he thinks with a shaky little laugh, he is just glad they got away. Then it truly hits him. He had suspected something like this might be true, but this ability of his is actually customizable. Not just one animal at a time, and not just the shapes he has already touched. He can blend them, tune them, and mix and match. That opens up an entirely different world of options. Far from the forest, in the shabby corners of the central district, life goes on as loudly as ever. Ragged men lounge in the shadow of leaning shanties and pass rumors back and forth the way people pass scraps of bread. One has heard that the whole area is about to become fetus family land. Another mutters that maybe the old duke went crazy, and honestly the new acting head does not seem to be in his right mind either. Someone else brightens and suggests that maybe there is buried treasure around here somewhere, and if there is they had better find it first. One of them turns to a boy called Mir and asks whether he is ready to pick some unsuspecting pockets. Among these shifty figures, one man stays completely quiet. This is young Master Milio, eldest son of Duke Milio, slumming it in disguise to spy on his family's rivals. In a low voice he tells his companions that the fetus family is already on the road to ruin. One of the men beside him blinks at the distant platform and wonders what Talon is even getting at up there. Milio does not answer. He simply keeps his gaze fixed on the platform, where a familiar teal-haired figure has just stepped up in front of the crowd. Talon stands still for a long moment, silent, then raises 2 fingers into the air. He announces 2 months. He warns that any vagrants remaining in this area after 2 months will be severely punished for defiling the sanctity of the holy temple. The reaction is immediate. One vagrant shouts back and demands to know where on earth they are supposed to go if they get kicked out, and whether Talon is basically telling them all to go die. Another calls out to someone named Sia to ask what was just set up on the platform. Sia yells back that he should stop worrying about that and just run away while he still can. Among the noble observers gathered further back, whispers begin to spread. One murmurs that this is how unexpected. He had thought the soft-hearted acting head of the fetus family would take pity on the vagrants. Talon lifts his hand once more. He answers that it will be a hospital. The fetus family will build a hospital here. On top of that, they will teach medical arts to those who will work at that very hospital. The murmuring swells at once into something between disbelief and outright laughter. One noble sneers at what an absurd idea it is. Another wonders whether it is not the role of nobles to both teach and learn medicine. A pair of well-dressed ladies smile behind their fans and mock that no sane family would ever send their children to learn medicine from the fallen fetus. They will only sink deeper into the abyss because of this. Beneath his hood, Milio watches all of it in silence. With the fetus family being shunned by nearly everyone in the empire, he thinks quietly. The odds of this plan succeeding are virtually zero. It seems he overestimated Talon. He will not need to pay this man any more attention at all. The thought is cut in half by a booming voice from behind. Someone bellows across the square and demands who dares to laugh at that man. Milio's head snaps up in surprise. A splendid white carriage rolls right through the crowd, and its driver is crying for the crowd to make way. On its side is emblazoned a crest that anyone in the capital would recognize at a glance. The door opens and a tall elderly man steps down. He has silver-white hair swept beneath a towering white mitre trimmed in gold, robes of white and pale blue draped down his shoulders, and a warm crinkled smile on his lined face. The crowd catches its breath and gasps of recognition ripple through it. Someone whispers the name Lord Vesper, the High Priest. He walks forward without hurry, straight toward the platform. His voice carries across the square with easy authority. Lord Vesper declares that he, Vesper, will vouch for Talon Chrysa, acting head of the fetus ducal house in the name of God. Talon drops immediately to one knee before him. Vesper says it is good to see him. Then Vesper calls out to the awed crowd, addressing them as lost children of Abiron, and tells them that they are all travelers bound for the same destination. He turns and begins to preach. He warns that temptation and the touch of evil will always lurk along the journey, yet how noble is this one who casts them aside and continues to walk the righteous path. Vesper reminds them that the fetus family was tainted by a single sinner, and that sin can never be washed away. Nevertheless, there is one who still tries to walk the path. He raises a wrinkled hand above Talon's bowed head. Vesper prays that this journey of atonement undertaken by this pitiful child of Abiron be fulfilled beneath God's blessing. Tears well behind Talon's glasses. He thanks the priest quietly, deeply moved by his precious words. Vesper waves the thanks off with a soft laugh. He remarks that when the fetus family is undertaking such a faithful project, how could he simply sit back and watch? He extends a hand and invites Talon to ride the carriage together with him and enter the temple. Once they are inside the shadowed cool of the great cathedral, Vesper turns to Talon and adds one more instruction. Since they have come all this way, they must pay their respects to Sierra the Great. Talon folds his hands together, closes his eyes, and gives a serene little smile that would fool anyone. Inside his own head, however, a very different sentence detonates. He thinks that this is a load of bullshit. This old bastard only crawled out here to put on a show. Well, either way, he thinks with quiet steel, he has no regrets about that decision. To proceed with the plan, he had to win over the High Priest, and he did. Later, as the fetus carriage rolls back out through the emptying square, Talon makes one final stop. He steps down beside the still hooded stranger loitering at the edge of the crowd, tilts his head courteously, and remarks that it was nice to see him too, young Master Milio. Under the hood, Milio freezes mid-breath. He asks himself with a dry laugh, since when did the man ever notice him? Talon's small polite smile hardens by a single degree as he adds, almost gently, that the world isn't so easily overturned. Far from the fetus square, inside a sunlit imperial chamber, a fist crashes down into a stone table. Debris explodes outward. The second prince roars a question about what the hell is with that damn old geezer. This is Dito Abiren, and his wild spiky blonde hair is even more disheveled than usual, and his golden eyes are narrowed into slits of fury. He wants to know why Vesper is suddenly showing up here. A composed aide standing at attention explains it plainly. The acting head simply put his brain to use for once. If the High Priest publicly supports the fetus enterprise, the nobles will have no choice but to fall in line. Dito snarls back that so that little insect actually tried using his head for once. Another advisor, standing off to the side in a formal white uniform, tries to interject that there is no need for the next emperor of Abiron to worry, and that he had said he had a way. Dito cuts him off and snaps that he will hear it later. He is too pissed off right now. He needs to kill someone to cool off. Then his voice sharpens. He asks whether the aide said the current acting head of the fetus ducal house is Talon Chrysa. The aide confirms that this is correct. As the third son of Count Chrysa's family, Talon served the late Duke Agony fetus's aide for 13 years. Dito's fingers tighten around the neck of a wine bottle. He remarks quietly that lately something just keeps getting on his nerves. He hurls the bottle. It smashes across the aide's forehead in a burst of glass and red spray. Blood streams down the man's face in a thick line, but he does not so much as blink. Dito drawls that just the aide standing there is enough to piss him off even more. He aide answers evenly with an apology. Dito adds with a lazy smirk that so he is no fun at all, and that is exactly why he keeps him around. Whatever comes next, if the aide is going to be boring, at least he can be efficient. Dito flops back into his chair, throws his arms behind his head, and lays out the order. He wants the aide to investigate the tax records of Count Chrysa's family over the past 5 years. If he finds even the slightest irregularity, he should arrest Count Chrysa immediately. If he cannot find anything, he should fabricate it and arrest the man anyway. And he should clean up that mess on his way out. The aide bows low and answers with a yes, Your Highness, as the drying blood catches the sunlight. Alone at last, Dito stares up at the bright ceiling with a listless grin. He mutters that it is a sunny day. That makes it even more annoying. He mutters that the first prince's body deteriorating faster than expected is also annoying. His grin widens into something almost manic as he tilts his head. He adds that Rasia recovering again is also annoying. From outside comes the voice of his aide Pale. Talon sets his papers aside as Pale steps inside with a fresh report. All preparations for the hospital's construction have been completed. Better yet, applications from nobles wishing to study and teach medicine have already exceeded their capacity. The Empire's aristocrats who were once ready to laugh Talon off the platform are now clawing at his gates for a seat at the academy. Talon answers with a quiet good. The problem, Pale continues, is the vagrants who still haven't left the central district. The 2-month deadline is almost up. He asks whether they should instruct the Knight Commander to prepare troops. Talon answers no, there is no need to involve Jack in this. He has something in mind. Pale acknowledges the answer. Then in the same measured tone he adds one more piece of news. A letter has arrived from House Chrysa. Talon's teal-green fringe lifts as his eyes widen behind his round glasses. He mutters that his birth family contacted him first, before he could even contact them. He wants to know what on earth they are scheming this late in the game. Talon breaks the wax seal and skims the parchment. Ego Chrysa of House Chrysa plans to visit the fetus ducal house. His breath catches. Brother, he thinks, and the word lands in his chest with the weight of a small stone. 2 weeks later, the receiving room of the fetus estate hums with a fragile politeness. A maid pours tea between 2 seated men. Talon sits stiff-backed on one side. Opposite him, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit sips his own cup. He has brown hair swept back and a neat mustache and short beard framing a firm mouth. This is Ego Chrysa, eldest son of House Chrysa, and Talon's older brother by blood. His news is not gentle. Igo says quietly that last night Count Chrysa was placed under house arrest. A tax audit conducted directly by the imperial family has turned up several supposed irregularities. If the charges are confirmed, their father may even end up imprisoned in an imperial prison. Talon does not answer at once. From high above, the 2 seated brothers look the way tiny figurines look on the ornate rug between them. What is certain, Igo goes on, is that their house is in crisis. At last Talon lifts his head. He remarks evenly that father was never one to chase pleasure, nor was he ever driven by ambition. He asks whether father hasn't always lived a diligent, quiet life. Igo interrupts softly and wonders whether Talon is saying that because he truly has no idea. Talon's expression cools by a single degree. He asks whether his brother wants him to say that he himself is the reason their family ended up like this. Well, he adds a beat later, more importantly, he recently heard an interesting story. He hears Igo has been putting vagrants from the central district to work on the fetus construction. Igo has been providing them with food and shelter in return for their labor as well. The construction site happened to have a need for workers, and of course reducing the number of vagrants naturally improves public order in the central district. He rests his cup on its saucer with a small click. He also heard Igo has been giving out food to the children for free. Igo's mouth thins. He answers that whether the fetus ducal house wants to become a relief center or a saint to the poor is not his concern. What concerns him is that the first prince wanted every vagrant in the central district wiped out. And now House Fetus is sheltering them by the hundreds. The room goes still. Talon closes his eyes briefly and reopens them with the finality of a door closing. He tells Ego that if he came all this way to waste his time with pointless talk, then please leave. He is a member of the Fetus family now. Ego rises and turns his back on the room. He says over his shoulder that he hopes his younger brother will think this over carefully one more time. He is still their father. Talon's voice cuts across the room without heat. He answers that father already cast him aside 13 years ago. Elsewhere in the capital, deep beneath the imperial palace, a very different kind of tantrum is unfolding. Footsteps tap sharply along the torchlit stone corridor of an underground sanctuary. This is Mentilla Biren, first princess of the empire, with her long honey blonde hair swept up above a lavish gown. She knows the Tinas ritual is important, but how long is she supposed to stay locked away in this pit? Being cooped up all day with nothing but servants is driving her mad. She gasps and freezes mid-step. Someone has stepped out of the shadows ahead of her. Mentil manages a greeting to your majesty and drops her voice. The empress herself has come. She wears a deep crimson gown embroidered with dark trim, her blonde hair styled up in elegant curls, and her smile is soft and slow. The empress murmurs a greeting to Lady Mentel and remarks that it has been a while. She wonders whether her daughter perhaps came all this way to see her mother. Then her tone edges. The empress asks the first princess if she intends to leave at this moment. She reminds her that preparations for the ritual should still be underway in the prayer room. The empress laughs lightly and asks whether her daughter is worrying about her mother now. She wonders how she could not, since Mental is the daughter she carried in her own womb. Every day she worries that something might happen or that Mental will make some mistake. Not a single day passes in peace for her. Mental's polite smile does not quite reach her eyes. She remarks carefully that the Empress is unusually affectionate today. The Empress goes on brightly and suggests they could enjoy tea beneath the open sky for the first time in a long while. The Empress cuts in with a small nervous laugh and says that she has seen her mother's face, so she will be leaving now. She claims she has an important appointment with His Majesty the Emperor. The Empress suggests to the first princess that she should return to her post at once. With the Tina's ritual so close, His Majesty should be staying inside the castle. Mental's spine locks. She wonders inwardly whether that was an insincere lie, or if something truly urgent came up. Meanwhile, far from all of these palaces and family politics, our boy is dropping out of a bright noonday sky the way a stone drops. Darami is clinging to his shoulder as a brown blur, and she is squeaking in alarm as the two of them tumble hard into the deep grass of the imperial forest. Ran hacks out coughs and spits out leaves. He is alive. Our boy drags himself up onto his elbows. He mutters that the more he digs into this ability, the stranger it appears to be. Not only can he transform into any animal he has touched, he can even combine different species however he wants. This ability's potential is far greater than he imagined, but there has to be some kind of drawback. Something like using it too much shortens his lifespan, maybe. Something along those lines. Then he pauses and blinks hard. Our boy wonders why his body suddenly feels like this. He mumbles that it feels even hotter today, as his knees buckle beneath him. Ran hits the forest floor face first with a soft thud. The trees around him blur and everything goes dark. For a while only the wind moves through the branches. Then a small brown and cream shape scampers up to his still hand. Darami tries a squeak. Nothing happens. She pats his cheek with a paw. Still no response. Darami sits back on her haunches, folds her tiny arms, and then, impossibly, she speaks in perfectly clear words. She chides softly and asks whether our boy really lost consciousness. Good grief, she says. What a weak fellow he is. A low growl rolls in from the tree line. The wolf from before pads out of the shade, head lowered, teeth bared uncertainly at the sleeping figure on the ground. Darami whirls on the beast at once. She scolds him to be quiet. She asks whether he cannot see the young man is sleeping right now. The wolf whines and folds his ears back the way a scolded pup would. Darami tips her head to one side. She teases him and wonders whether this is because she bit him earlier. She was just playing around for the first time in ages and she calls him petty. The wolf whimpers piteously. She glances at our boy on the ground, then back at the wolf and giggles. And then she doubles over laughing outright in a bright ringing laugh that no ordinary forest squirrel could ever make. Above the sleeping human, a golden radiance begins to bloom. The little squirrel's tiny outline shimmers, and behind her and around her, the shape of a tall, slender woman stretches into being. Darami is made entirely of soft gold light, with long hair spilling down her shoulders and glowing feet not quite touching the grass. Her voice comes out warm and old as forest itself. The golden woman tells them all that when the time comes they should spread the word to every animal in this forest. She wants them to tell the animals that the one they've all waited for has finally appeared, inside a sunlit garden pavilion of the imperial palace. Raisha Abiran, the first prince, sits slouched on a garden couch with his platinum blonde hair swept back from a tired face. Dito is complaining. He mutters that he had thought the fetus family was only building a hospital, but they have gone and built a relief center for vagrants as well. He wonders whether they are intentionally trying to piss Raisha off, brother. Raisha's expression darkens. He notes quietly that no matter how many insects swarm together, they are still just insects. They are nothing more than beggars who would not even be able to handle his menace. Damn it, he adds. The more he thinks about it, the more annoyed he gets. Dito swirls his wine and answers with his usual predatory smile. If things had gone according to plan, those insects would have been eradicated a long time ago, and Dito himself would already be preparing to start a whole new project by now. Their sulking is interrupted by the arrival of a nervous younger sibling. It is the third prince, brown-haired and stammering. He manages a greeting to your highnesses. Then he adds that fancy meeting the both of them here. The third prince pours flattery onto Raisha. He praises that the first prince was truly amazing during the evening Manus ritual this week. He wonders how Raisha can possibly possess such incredible Manus. As expected, he says, Raisha is the one destined to lead Abiran's future. Dito lifts his glass with a slow gleaming smile. He answers softly that he concurs, and when that time comes, he adds, he will be both happy and sad, because it will be difficult to see his beloved brother anymore. The third prince blinks in confusion. Dito's smile sharpens. He explains that so that Dito as emperor can govern the imperial capital well, the third prince will faithfully carry out his assigned duties in the border regions properly, won't he? The unspoken rule is that a new emperor bestows positions upon his siblings the moment he ascends to the throne. It is a tradition meant to prevent power struggles inside the royal family. Just now, without so much as raising his voice, Dito has practically decided the future of that pitiful third prince. Banished from the comfortable and prosperous capital, the young man is now destined to spend the rest of his life in the barren borderlands. Then again, Dito has always intended to drive every one of his younger siblings out of the capital eventually, except for one. Razia murmurs that Dito did not have to tell him so soon, since he looked unnecessarily pitiful. Dito answers coolly that if the third prince is destined to leave anyway, it is better for him to know in advance. Razia suggests that if the aide feels so sorry for the boy, why does he not give up his position as the emperor's aide to him? The aide answers dryly whether Razia is serious. Being freed from the emperor's relentless workload does sound rather tempting. More importantly, Razia goes on. He wants to know if Dito has thought about what Razia told him last time. He means the bold man with glasses from the fetus family. Dito's smile deepens. He murmurs that it was not bad. Instead of just sitting still for a year, he decides, interfering now would be much more entertaining. Some distance from the palace, a fetus carriage rocks steadily down the wide garden avenue toward the meeting grounds. Inside, Pale delivers his morning report. A new coal mine has been discovered in the south. Baron Jones, who owns the surrounding territory, will formally claim ownership of that mine. However, the Baron borrowed money from the fetus ducal house a long time ago and has never fully repaid it. Pale suggests they have the Baron exchange the accumulated interest into management rights over the mine instead. Tolan acknowledges the plan. He wants to know the status of the employees. Pale answers that after Tolan's public speech the number of deserters temporarily increased, but thanks to the Central District project, things have largely stabilized. Also, Pale adds carefully, he did not get a chance to tell Tolan earlier, but a message arrived from House Krysa early this morning. It seems Count Krysa has now been imprisoned in the Imperial dungeon. Tolan closes his eyes for a moment. He mutters that this is exquisite timing. Of all days, it happens on the very day he is attending a nobles' meeting at the invitation of the Imperial family. Behind his glasses, his eyes tighten. Tolan wonders if there is one possible reason, and whether it could really be the vagrants after all. He asks himself if they are planning to suffocate House Fetus from every direction, one squeeze at a time, as the price for daring to rebel against God. Pale gently asks whether he is alright. Tolan answers yes and not to worry about it. Pale mentions that he has prepared some medicine for his headache, but it causes drowsiness, so Tolan cannot take it right now. Tolan wants to know how much longer. Pale says they will arrive in about 5 minutes. Tolan sighs that damn Imperial Garden sure is huge. Inside the meeting hall's marble antechamber, the Empire's dukes are already circling. A well-dressed bearded man approaches Tolan with an oily smile and a warm greeting. This is Duke Milio, a rival ducal noble and the father of the same young Master Milio, who was caught spying under a hood on Fetus land 2 chapters ago. The Duke goes on smoothly. He hears Tolan has been spending very busy days at the Fetus ducal house. He calls it truly remarkable to undertake such an enormous project in the heart of the Empire. As a matter of fact, Milio adds, he heard about the events in the Central District from his own son. His son said Tolan was quite majestic in front of the crowd alongside the High Priest. Milio muses that if the late Agony Fetus had seen such a splendid sight, that man never would have dreamed of betraying the Empire. Then Milio's tone lifts into a very quiet warning. He remarks that Tolan will have to put a lot of effort into educating the young Duke he was left behind with. Milio worries aloud how terribly troublesome it would be if young Flynn followed in his father's footsteps and became a traitor too. Tolan's polite mask does not slip. He answers evenly. Speaking of Milio's son, he wants to know if the Duke means the young Lord Milio he saw that day. Tolan mentions the one hiding among the people the way a rat would, with his face covered by a robe, and just as a traitor would, he asks whether that is the kind of education House Milio prides itself on. Milio splutters and calls him a crazy bastard. Tolan does not blink. He goes on that he heard Milio recently expanded his steel business significantly. No doubt the Duke was counting on Baron Jones's newly discovered coal mine. However, the Fetus family will soon possess ownership rights over that very mine. He wonders whether, if Fetus were to refuse to supply minerals to Milio, the Duke's businesses would not find themselves in quite a bit of trouble. Milio's face pales. Tolan lifts his eyes calmly. He recommends the Duke watch his mouth depending on the time and situation. An announcer's voice cuts across the hall. Razia and Dito walk in together, in matching white ceremonial uniforms with imperial blue sashes across their chests. The nobles bow. Tolan watches Rasha's face pass by his own, and behind his glasses the words he cannot say out loud strike his throat with the force of a fist. He thinks silently at Rasha Abiran, and wonders whether the first prince does not feel anything at all after killing Duke Fetus with his own hands. The announcer calls that they may all be seated. He announces the meeting will now begin. After the earlier discussion regarding the border regions, they will move on to the central district of the imperial capital. Rasha lifts a report from the table and his golden yellow eyes are cool and unreadable. He questions the Fetus family flatly on the current progress. Tolan steps forward and bows. He reports that as acting head of the Fetus ducal house, Tolan Krysa is here to report. Construction of the hospital has entered the structural framing stage. At the same time, they are training medical personnel and carrying out relief efforts for the surrounding slum. Rasha narrows his eyes as if pulling a distant memory. He remembers now. After he won the last hunting festival, His Majesty the Emperor granted him the development rights to the central district beside the temple. However, Agony Fetus appeared out of nowhere and snatched Rasha's authority away. So this is what became of it. Based on various reports Rasha has received recently, Rasha adds, public safety in the center of the imperial capital has improved significantly. Dito confirms that is correct. Rasha goes on that it is all thanks to the hospital construction project of the Fetus ducal house. They are already praised among the citizens of the empire. Rasha announces to the whole hall that it is something worth praising. Acting head Fetus, he adds that he has high expectations for Tolan's future. Unlike certain rotten nobles who cannot even produce decent results, a family like Tolan's truly deserves the full support of the imperial family. Tolan bows deeper than protocol requires. He answers that he is deeply honored, Your Highness. He will continue to carry out this project with the utmost sense of responsibility. Then Razia steps down from the raised platform and comes right up to him. He murmurs almost warmly that now, humility is admirable, but that alone cannot feed his people, can it? By His Majesty the Emperor's decree, Razia has no authority to interfere in the development project. But he remarks that handling something of this magnitude alone must be quite a burden for the family. He offers that the imperial family will provide as much support as Tolan needs, as long as the Fetus family asks for it. The trap sits inside the offer the way a needle sits inside a peach. If Tolan asks, Fetus admits it cannot manage on its own. If Tolan refuses, Fetus insults the crown. Tolan answers with practiced grace that he must humbly ask this of the first prince, and he kneels. He reports that the hospital project is currently lacking in professional personnel and equipment. Therefore, should the imperial family choose to assist them, they would never forget such boundless grace. Razia's smile widens by a hair. Meanwhile, far from all of these polished marble rooms, our boy finally stirs beneath the trees of the imperial forest. Ran Abiran, the seventh prince, pulls himself upright with a slow breath. His body no longer aches, and the forest guardian's care has left him rested and quiet-eyed. He admits inwardly that he could not pay much attention to the capital for a while because he had been away in this forest for so long, but his political instincts have not gone dull. Our boy can feel the imperial capital slipping into a rhythm he does not like, one where Tolan faces the wolves alone while our boy sits under leaves. His mouth curves into a small cold smile. He decides quietly that perhaps it is finally time to re-establish some discipline.